The glass shattered the moment he introduced his mistress. The chandeliers glowed gold. The orchestra softened. 300 people held their breath as Adrian Cole raised a microphone and thanked the wife who built his fortune, right before replacing her under the same spotlight. Vivian stood frozen in champagne silk, her face calm, her heart dying in complete silence. Then she walked out into the night with one black suitcase and disappeared like a ghost from her own life. 3 years later, a black car pulled up. A dangerous man stepped out first. And when he offered his hand to the woman in the back seat, the empire Adrian once ruled began to die the same way she had, publicly, elegantly, and without mercy.
Heels. What you see here is the anatomy of a public execution. The stage is set on their anniversary, where a husband does not merely replace his wife, he makes a spectacle of it. Then, 3 years on, the ghost he made of her walks back into his world, Heels, and on her arm is a man who could unmake him with a single word. The venue is a ballroom, an arena built for the city's 300 wealthiest families. There, among the shimmer of crystal and the glint of champagne, her husband takes a microphone, Heels, takes another woman's hand, and his wife watches it all from 20 feet away, wearing a dress he picked out. He smiles, says her name like an incantation for a spirit long past, and then he announces an upgrade. She did not cry. She made no scene, Heels. She just packed a single suitcase, walked out of the frame, and was gone. But now, after 3 years of absolute silence, she is back, and you will want to watch this, Heels. The vengeance this woman is about to visit upon the man who splintered her soul, with her powerful new husband as her silent patron, will be nothing less than a masterwork of psychological demolition. Heels, and so it begins. The Hale Cole estate was not a home so much as a monument to conquest, a sheer face of stone and glass on Briarcliff's highest cliff, staring down at the ocean as if in judgment. On the night of the gala, its windows were ablaze, Heels, like blocks of gold. The long drive was a tangle of the hired engines of opulence, catering vans, and the hushed movements of valets. In the garden, a string quartet scraped melancholic arrangements into the evening air, and on the second floor, Heels, a woman stood before a mirror, her entire focus on the simple, steady act of breathing. Her name was Vivian Hale. She was 34 years old, and for the last 11 of them, her profession had been to be married to Adrian Cole, Heels. She was the silent architect of his empire, there when his office was a rented room over a Queensgate laundromat. It was her face he saw in the sterile light of hospital waiting rooms beside his mother, Heels. She had trained her own mouth to smile at men she loathed, all because Adrian needed something from them. And tonight, on the anniversary of vows spoken before strangers in a courthouse, her job was to be the beautiful, Heels, silent trophy of his success for the entire East Coast to see. That was the contract. She smoothed the silk of her dress, champagne pale, deliberately simple. Adrian liked her in muted things. He called it elegance, Heels. But she knew its real purpose was to make the other wives, with their bright colors and jewels, look desperate. The war over what she wore had ended around year 6. "You look like $1 million, Mrs. Cole." That was Marisol on her knees, Heels, fixing the hem, Heels. Marisol had been with the Coles for 9 years. She was the only other soul in this gilded cage that Vivian called a friend. "I look exhausted," Vivian said. "You look exhausted and like $1 million, Marisol corrected, Heels, getting to her feet and brushing her knees. "Are you going to eat something before you descend into that theater? You didn't touch your lunch. I'll grab something at the party." "No, you won't." "I will, Mari," Heels. Marisol gave her the look, one eyebrow raised in an arc that carried the weight of long documented history. She crossed to the dresser, found a granola bar, and shoved it into Vivian's hand. "2 bites," she ordered. "But before your foot even touches a stair, Heels. 2 bites or I'm calling your mother, Heels. My mother is in Fort Lauderdale. I have her number." Vivian let out a laugh, a real one, a sound that would, in a few short hours, become an artifact of a life she no longer lived. She did not know this, of course. She took the 2 required bites, Heels. She hugged Marisol, a familiar comfort of lavender and laundry soap. Then she left the bedroom and began the long walk down the hall to the grand staircase. Adrian was already there. His voice, an instrument of casual power, rose up to meet her, Heels. It was one of the first things that had ever drawn her to him, back when he was a 23-year-old with a bad haircut and a world-changing idea scrawled on a bar napkin. You could hear Adrian Cole from across a ballroom, across a street. And now, Heels, she often thought, You could hear him from the other side of a dead marriage. Feels. And my point, Miller, is that the bottom line doesn't give a damn about your feelings. She came around the landing and his words stopped. He tilted his head back, watching her slow descent to the base of the stairs. For one fragile, impossible second, Feels she saw it. The way he used to look at her, as if she were the solution to a puzzle he was just beginning to understand. Then it was gone. Snuffed out, replaced with the polished, transactional smile he used for business. There she is, he announced. Feels. The woman of the hour. The woman of this hour, maybe. She stepped onto the marble floor. You're early. I'm on time. You're late. I am his wife. I'm allowed to make an entrance, Miller. Feels, the man beside Adrian in a tuxedo that hung like a cheap garment bag, gave a short, nervous bark of a laugh. Feels. Adrian looked at his watch. Guests arrive at 7, he said, the words stripped of all warmth. It is 6:51. Then I have 9 minutes. Viv, Adrian. He let out a sharp sigh through his nose. Feels. A sound more intimate to her than a kiss. It was the sound of his patience wearing away to nothing. It was the sound that meant do not make a scene. It meant become wallpaper. Reaching him, Feels. She performed the kiss on the cheek required of the woman of the hour. He smelled of the cologne she bought him for his birthday, but under it was something else, a strange note she couldn't identify. You smell different, she murmured. New shampoo. Feels. Viv, please, not tonight. Feels. I didn't say anything. She held his eyes. She just stared, letting the silence stretch for so long that Miller, the human suit carrier, suddenly found the bar immensely fascinating. Adrian, she started. Is something wrong? Feels. Everything is perfectly fine. You've been. Everything is fine, Vivian. Can we just get through tonight? That's all I ask. Just get through tonight. She almost asked him what he meant by that. Get through tonight, Feels. As if the party were a root canal. As if it were a hurricane they needed to board the windows for. But then the chime of the doorbell cut through the air. The first guests were here. The butler pulled the doors open. Feels. And Adrian's 1,000-watt charisma ignited, his arms open wide, his voice booming once more. Feels. Senator, what a pleasure. And this must be the stunning Mrs. Hargrove. And just like that, the moment was gone. The party, from all appearances, was a perfect piece of theater. This was the murmur all night, Feels. Spoken in that particular rhythm, the rich used to approve of each other's possessions. The flowers, Vivian, are just heavenly. The string quartet, what a find. And the food, my God, the food. She smiled. She accepted the praise. Feels. She looped her arm through Adrian's when a camera appeared, tilting her chin at the exact angle the publicist had coached her on back in 2018. Flash, flash, flash. Beautiful, Mrs. Cole, just one more. Feels. She had a single glass of champagne and then switched to water. She'd learned many years ago that the champagne at these events was a kind of poison. Feels. The women who drank too much said too much, and the women who said too much became the subject of Monday morning gossip. A little after 9, she made her retreat toward the East Hall powder room, desperate for a moment of asylum. Her feet ached. Feels. The muscles in her face burned from the effort of holding a smile. All she wanted was to sit on a closed toilet lid, bury her face in her hands for 60 seconds, and then walk back out to the firing line. That's when she heard them. Feels. The powder room and Adrian's private office shared a wall, a small damning fact of architecture she hadn't thought about in years. She had been in this room 1,000 times and heard nothing. But tonight, muffled through the plaster, Feels, she heard Adrian's voice drop to a conspiratorial whisper, and then the low, answering tone of another woman. Feels. I told you I would handle it. You keep saying that, Adrian. Tonight. I give you my word, it's getting done tonight. Your word. Camille. Don't Camille me. You've been saying tonight for 6 months. Things are different now. Feels. The new contracts are signed. Her name is off everything. She can't. Legally, she can't. I'm not worried about the legal part. Well, I am. I built that company. We built that company. You and I, from the lake house. Did you forget? Silence. Feels. On the other side of the wall, Vivian stood with her hand clamped over her mouth, her own breathing a forgotten function. I haven't forgotten, Adrian said, finally, his voice so low that if she hadn't been pressed against the drywall, Feels, she would have missed it completely. Feels. I haven't forgotten a single thing, baby. A very, very long time ago, that word had belonged to her. Not anymore, now she was Viv, or a public honey, and on the worst nights she was Vivian, her name stretched out like a chastisement. Feels. She staggered back from the wall as if it had burned her. Through the plaster, she heard the sound of a kiss. It was the smallest thing, a soft, wet report, a woman's faint gasp, and the low rumble of a man's chuckle. Heels. Vivian has no memory of leaving the powder room. The world snaps back into focus in the hall where she is standing under a great crystal chandelier. A waiter is holding out a tray of miniature crab cakes, and she hears herself say, "No, thank you," Heels, in a voice that was, with terrifying and absolute control, perfectly normal. Heels. She drifts back into the ballroom, and what greets her is a violence of the soul. In the gilt-edged mirror, it is not her face that looks back, but the face of a ravaged stranger. She finds herself judging the woman's wild hair, the panic in her eyes, Heels, before the ice-cold shock of recognition floods her veins. The champagne flute she lifts is not for drinking. It is an anchor, a cold weight for a hand that no longer has a name to sign. This is the hollow silence after a life has been deleted by contract. Heels. Cole Hale Holdings, a name that now feels like a ghost story. Had her name ever truly been etched into its cornerstone? The last 6 months unspool not as memory, but as exhibits in a trial, Heels, revealing a disappearance so carefully orchestrated with paper and ink in the sacred quiet of her own home. Heels. The architecture of the betrayal rises before her, built from reams of paper he called restructuring. Signature after signature, an act of faith founded on the bedrock of their marriage. When her own lawyer retired, Adrian had made it sound so simple, Heels, so disarmingly kind. Just use mine, he'll look after you. But the truth, the real reason she signed was a weariness that had settled deep in her bones, an exhaustion so complete it extinguished all caution. Still, her knees never buckled. A small, Heels, secret triumph she would cling to later. And then a name cuts through the din, Vivian. She turns, Adrian is walking toward her, but he is not alone. He moves as a pair, tethered to a woman, 29, Heels. Maybe 30, wrapped in a dress the color of fresh blood, slit to the thigh. Heels. This woman, Camille, has a face that makes jewelry an insult. She is a sun, burning so brightly that the dress, the hair, the artifice all dissolve into irrelevance, a face with the power to stop time. Viv, there's someone I want you to meet. Heels. Vivian feels the moment arrive not as a surprise, but as an inevitability, like the cold, unalterable physics of a car crash. This is Camille Devereaux. She's been, consulting for us. For me, Heels. And his hand comes to rest on the small of Camille's back. Vivian's world narrows to that single point of contact, his hand on another woman's body. Camille's slight, almost imperceptible lean into his touch, Heels, like a flower turning its head toward the only light in the room. Heels. It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Camille says, her voice like velvet, but her eyes are chips of ice. Likewise, Vivian hears herself reply, the word a dry leaf. I've heard so much about you. Is that so? The jaws of the trap snap shut. Viv. Heels. Adrian's smile is stretched thin, a wire about to break. Don't, I'm only being polite, Adrian. I asked a question. Is that so? He's perfectly civil to me. A phantom of a smirk plays on Camille's lips, confirming it all. She is no pawn. Heels. She is a co-conspirator, savoring every second of the kill. This is her coronation. Adrian glances at his watch, a motion that screams this is all running to plan, that this public slaughter was written into the schedule. The music dies. Heels. A single spotlight bleeds onto the stage. Heels. His hand on her elbow is the touch of an owner. Come on, baby, time to go. She lets him guide her, her mind filled with white noise, her heart a wild bird beating against the cage of her ribs. He grips the microphone. He takes her hand. Heels. Arranging her beside him as if she were a floral arrangement. Friends, he says, and polite applause ripples through the room. 11 years ago, Heels. A 23-year-old kid with nothing in his pockets. Somehow talked a 23-year-old girl who was completely out of his league into marrying him at the courthouse. The room fills with practiced laughter. Heels, feasting on the myth they all know by heart. Heels. This is the gospel of Adrian Cole, the man who built an empire from dust, a story they drink like fine wine. That girl is standing next to me tonight. He turns to her, a cue for the smile she puts on like a mask. And I need to take a moment, Heels, in front of all of you to thank her, because she has been my partner in every conceivable way. She's been patient, loyal. She has worked, so many of you don't realize. She worked in this business right beside me since day one. Vivian built Cole Hale with me, Heels, and my gratitude is more than I can ever express. The applause becomes a deafening roar. Heels. In the front row, a woman dabs at her eyes with a napkin. Vivian just waits. She knows the cadence of his stories. But, Adrian says, there it is, the hinge on which her life will turn. But, he repeats, people grow. Heels. And sometimes the partner you build the boat with isn't the partner you need to sail it into the deep. An absolute, profound stillness falls over the room. Feels. I've done a lot of praying, a lot of soul searching, and I've come to realize that Vivian and I, we love each other. We always will. But we want different futures. And it would be a profound lie to keep on pretending. The spotlight is no longer warm. Feels. It is the cold, white light of an interrogation room. Feels. She does not move, not a single tear. Her gaze finds a hairline crack in the plaster on the far wall, a tiny flaw she'd noticed weeks before. It becomes her whole world. Vivian, Adrian says, his voice thick with the grief he has summoned for the occasion, feels. I will be grateful for the rest of my life. But tonight, I have to be honest. I am done pretending. He turns, offering a hand out toward the audience, and Camille climbs the 3 stairs, not as a guest, but as a queen ascending to her throne. Feels. This is Camille, he announces. She is the woman I want to sail that ship with. Feels. Somewhere in the silent room, a champagne flute shatters on the floor, the sound impossibly loud. No one breathes. Vivian, Adrian says again, turning to her with tears he has expertly produced, and in that instant, a terrible, final clarity strikes her. Feels. After 11 years, she finally understands. For Adrian Cole, sorrow is just another tool to be used. I'm sorry. I am so sorry. You deserve a new beginning. And in a movement that comes from somewhere deeper than thought, Feels. Her hand shoots out and takes the microphone from his. Feels. Her own body, a traitor to its paralysis, acted for her. Adrian's almost imperceptible flinch is the most honest thing she has witnessed all night. It was the one detail he forgot to script, the one variable he never imagined her. She lifts the microphone, Feels. The metal cool against her skin as 200 people hold their breath. Thank you, Adrian, she says, her voice a column of sound, steady and clear, shocking even herself. Thank you, she repeats, for sharing your truth with all of us. Feels. I can only imagine how much courage that took. True confusion flickers across his face. And Camille, she says, turning to the other woman, welcome. Feels. Truly, Camille's victorious smirk begins to curdle. I hope he becomes for you. Vivian's voice rings out, clean and sharp, everything he has been for me. She places the microphone back in his hand. She turns. She walks down the steps. Feels. And then she begins the long journey across the ballroom, a walk through a valley of 300 of the city's most powerful people, who stare in absolute silence. As she passes one table, a woman's hand starts to reach for her. Feels. A gesture of solidarity that dies in the air. Vivian doesn't look. In the grand hall, Marisol is already there. The staff has heard everything. Mrs. Cole, Mari, I need the suitcase. Miss Cole, the small black one. I need it. Feels. Pack for me. Practical things. The denim and the cash from the safe in the closet. The code is our anniversary. You remember it. Please, just go. Marisol disappears. Vivian stands alone in the foyer she designed. Feels. Her eyes fixed on the chandelier she'd spent months sourcing from Milan, 6 years ago. There are no tears. There is only a terrifying glass-like calm. She is a woman standing on a frozen lake. Feels. Knowing one wrong thought will send her plunging into the black water below. 4 minutes, Marisol is back, suitcase in hand. She drapes a coat over Vivian's shoulders. Your passport is in the outside pocket, Marisol whispers, her voice urgent. Feels. And I wrote down my sister's address in Redondo. She's expecting you. Don't argue. Feels. Just leave. And don't tell him, Marisol pleads. You cannot tell him where you are going, Mrs. Cole. I won't. Tell no one. Do you hear me? Not your mother. Not a single friend. No one. I won't. Marisol's hands are shaking as she holds Vivian's face. Feels. You are going to be fine, she says, her voice burning with a ferocious belief. Listen to me. You will be so fine that one day his memory of you will wake him up in a cold sweat in the middle of the night. Vivian kisses her forehead, turns, feels, and walks out the door into the dark. A town car sits waiting, not hers. An anonymous car commandeered from the party, driven by a man in his 60s whose face holds the roadmap of the entire city. He is the perfect vessel for an escape. Feels. He watches the impossible sight. A woman in an evening gown walking down the mansion steps alone, pulling a small suitcase. He gets out, opens the back door for her, and says nothing. The airport, she breathes out. Please. Yes, ma'am. Which one? Feels. I really don't care. Their eyes find each other in the rearview mirror. Which terminal, ma'am? A noise that is almost a laugh, but is actually a sob, escapes her throat. The one, she says, with the next flight out. He simply nods and drives, feels, asking nothing more. He sees her shivering and turns up the heat, his silence a strange comfort. Miles down the highway, his voice is quiet. My wife left me 22 years ago, ma'am. Night just like this one, suitcase and all. She's doing great now, feels. For what it's worth. Vivian leans her forehead against the cold glass, and that is when the tears finally come. She pays in cash for the first flight she can get. A red-eye to Lisbon, a stop in Newark, still wearing the champagne-colored gown. Heels. The woman at the gate is a study in professional restraint, her curiosity a palpable force. In a terminal shop, Vivian buys a sweatshirt and leggings and transforms herself in the sterile anonymity of a bathroom stall. The gown, heels, the shimmering skin of her old life. She doesn't fold it, she pushes it deep into a public trash can. On the airplane, as the city that owned her for a decade shrinks to a meaningless pattern of light, a new feeling rises. Heels. She had braced herself for heartbreak. What she feels is something colder, sharper, and infinitely more dangerous. Heels. It did not end in fire, but in the cold clinical removal of a tumor. She had for so long been a phantom haunting the halls of that house, an apparition moving through a life she mistakenly thought was her own. Heels. A truth that had yet to breach the surface of her consciousness. But now it was codified, signed and sealed in an awful quiet. She begs for sleep. It turns its back on her. For the first time in what feels like a lifetime, Heels, she allows herself to unearth the woman who came before Adrian Cole. A girl from Saltbrook, born in a small house to a father who taught math and a mother who sold homes. The young woman who bled for a state university degree, working 2 jobs, Heels, until she collided with a loud, charming man named Adrian at some party she can no longer place. He burned with a kind of internal fire, a gravity that made her want to throw her own small ambitions onto his pyre, just to watch them burn. Heels. That woman was smart, she was funny. Heels. She had friends, a plan for Chicago, a favorite cafe, a song that held everything. Heels. Somewhere high above the Atlantic, Vivian searches for the notes of that song and finds only an empty frequency, a static shriek where music used to be. And in that hollow space, a cold certainty takes root. The erasure of her own soul had begun years ago. Heels. Tonight was just the funeral. And so, Lisbon dies before it's ever born. She steps off the plane in Newark and does not look back, trading cash for another ticket, to a smaller city this time, a place where her name would sound like a mispronunciation. Heels. She dusts off a middle name from her mother, a maiden name that has lain dormant for 11 years. Vivian Rose Lang. The name slips past the ticketing agent, unnoticed. Her phone has been a dead thing since the ballroom. Heels. In the sterile anonymity of a new bathroom stall, she resurrects it, watching the ghosts of her old life flood the screen. 47 missed calls. Heels. 113 text messages. Voicemails thick with desperation from her mother. From sisters-in-law she barely knew. One from a woman she hadn't spoken to in 3 years, suddenly an expert in manufactured sympathy. And Adrian. Heels. 6 unheard messages from him, the last one logged at 2:14 a.m., his voice a poison she no longer had the strength to drink. She will not listen. She allows her eyes to scan the first 3 texts and then stops. Heels. The phone feels like an anchor chained to a drowned ship, and she lets it fall into the toilet bowl. It doesn't sink. Of course not. It just floats, a dumb black mirror reflecting the shattered world she ran from. Heels. She leaves it there and walks until she finds Marisol's sister in a small apartment over a laundromat, in a town that smelled of salt and coming rain. Her name was Teresa. Heels. She had a softer air than Marisol, but the same kindness lived in her eyes. She answers the door at 7 in the morning wearing a simple housecoat and just looks at Vivian. At the sweatshirt and leggings, the single suitcase, Heels, the hair pulled back like a punishment, the face scrubbed clean of the life she'd just burned to the ground. Teresa asks nothing. She just says, "Mari called. Come in. I put coffee on." And Vivian crosses the threshold. Teresa pours a cup, Heels, sets it on the table, and sits with her hands folded. "My sister says you don't want to talk." "No, okay, we won't." Vivian's hand reaches for the coffee, but the tremor is a violent, living thing. She has to pull back. "What do you need?" Teresa asks. Heels, her voice like solid earth beneath shifting sand. The question makes Vivian see herself for the first time. Heels. A haircut, she hears herself say, the words foreign in her own mouth. And a job. A new name too, but I think I have that part figured out. Teresa gives a slow, considered nod. "The hair, I can do that right here," she offers. "I used to cut on the ships." Heels. "The job, I can ask around. My cousin knows someone with a bookkeeping office. She's always looking." "Bookkeeping? You helped run a company, right?" "I did." "Then you can run books." And at that, Vivian laughs. It is a terrible sound. Heels. Small and broken like wreckage washed ashore, but it is real. "Okay," she breathes. "Bookkeeping." Teresa stands, pulls shears and a towel from a drawer, and comes back. She stands behind Vivian, her hands gathering the long, heavy fall of dark hair. Heels. How much are we taking off, she asks. All of it. Honey, that's a lot of hair. All of it. A beat of silence. The world seems to hold its breath then. Okay, Teresa says. The scissors begin their work. A quiet snip and release. Heels. And the long, dark strands of Vivian Hale begin to fall to the linoleum floor. In a kitchen over a laundromat, in a town she does not know. The day after she lit a match to her own life and walked away with nothing but a bag. She does not move. Feels. She closes her eyes, and for the first time in 11 years, deep beneath the weight of the numbness, something shifts, not peace, nothing like it. It was the first deep rumble of a coming quake. Something patient, something that knew how to wait, feels. Something that would one day go back to that ballroom and burn to ash everything Adrian Cole had ever built, feels. She did not have a name for it yet, but Teresa, standing there with the shears, felt it. She would tell her sister this, years later, that the woman who sat down in that chair was not the one who stood up, feels. It was as if something new slipped in through the window while the hair was falling, and something old was finally allowed to walk out the door. Vivian just stared at herself in the little mirror on the wall. Hair gone. Face bare. Heels. A cheap sweatshirt from an airport shop. A stranger. There, Teresa said, her voice soft. There you are. Vivian's fingers traced the raw, short edges of her hair. She took a shuddering breath. Vivian is dead, she said to the mirror, to the room. Heels. To the ghost that was no longer there. Heels. Teresa says nothing. A truck groans past on the street below, making the old building tremble. The morning light is a flat, indecisive gray. 4,000 miles away, Adrian Cole stands alone in his huge, silent house, still wearing his tuxedo, feels. Dialing a number that will never ring again. He doesn't know yet. It will take him a very long time to understand that he just lit the fuse to the bomb that will consume his entire world. You see, he made one fatal mistake, feels. He threw her away without first checking to see if she could be replaced. She could not. And 3 years from this morning, a black car with dark windows will pull up to a curb in the old city, feels. A man with silver in his hair and a gun under his jacket will get out first, then turn and offer a hand to the woman inside, feels. And she will take it. She will step out of the darkness and into the light, and the world Adrian Cole built so carefully will finally begin to crack. But that is 3 years from now. For now, there is only a kitchen. The thrum of a laundromat below, feels. And the woman who used to be Vivian Hale, lifting a coffee cup with 2 hands. She drinks, and it is without question the best damn coffee she has ever had. That cup of coffee in Teresa's kitchen was the first rite of a new religion, feels, though she didn't know it. In that moment, it was just an anchor. Her hands needed something to do. If they didn't have something to do, they would start shaking again, and she could not afford to shake. Not today, feels. Not anymore. Teresa not asking questions was the first kindness. The second was a narrow cot in a room that was more of a large closet with a window. The third was a shoebox she slid out from under her bed. It held $942, feels. Teresa pushed it over the table. It's a loan, she said. Pay me back if you can. If you can't, I never had it anyway. No shame. Take it. Mari told me what she packed for you. It's good money, feels. But it's not enough for a woman who doesn't know what it costs to become a ghost yet. It goes faster than you think. Take this, feels. I'll file it somewhere else, Vivian says, taking the folder. The woman's name is Rhoda, and she runs her bookkeeping business out of what used to be a dentist's office. She doesn't ask for a resume, feels. She just points to a long column of numbers and tells Vivian to add them up in her head. Vivian has the answer before Rhoda's calculator screen even lights up. And just like that, Rhoda says, you start Monday. Cash, no benefits, feels. And don't you dare tell the other girls I'm paying you more. Thank you, Vivian says, but Rhoda just shakes her head. Don't thank me. Thank me when you don't look like someone just shot your dog. But that look, it stayed for a long, long time, feels. For that first month in Teresa's closet, she ran on nothing but raw nerve, never sleeping more than 3 hours a night, feels. She would lie on that cot, her gaze fixed on a pale water stain blooming across the ceiling, a ragged geography that looked so much like Ohio, and she would simply wait for the treason of her own mind. On some nights, it obliged, feels. 2 in the morning would bleed through the darkness, and with it, the phantom effervescence of champagne on her tongue, feels. Then the echo of Adrian's voice. We want different things now. And her stomach would clench into a knot so vicious she'd have to grip the mattress. Her fingers digging in, feels. Anchoring herself to this world by counting the threads in her thin blanket until the panic finally broke. She charted an entire universe in those threads that first month. She knew the topography of that blanket better than the lines on her own hands, heels. But the true agony, the absolute crucible, was the silence she imposed upon her mother. She knew she was back in Fort Lauderdale, surely drowning in worry, heels. So Vivian found a postcard at a gas station, a flimsy piece of cardboard on which she wrote a lie and a truth, and sent it with no return address. Heels. I'm alive. I'm safe. Please don't look for me. I love you. I'll be back when I can. She knew the words would arrive not as comfort, but as a precise instrument designed to shatter her mother's heart, heels, that the road back to forgiveness would be a pilgrimage across broken glass. But it was a road that could eventually be walked. As for Adrian, that was a territory she refused to enter. If her mind strayed there, it was like a tongue probing the raw, heels, empty socket of a freshly pulled tooth. You feel the void, you sense the slow work of healing, but you learn with great care not to disturb it. And Camille, she did not permit herself to think of Camille. Camille was not a memory. Camille was a calculus, heels, a problem to be solved. In her third month, she found the library, a squat brick building whose reading room smelled perpetually of decaying paper and the sharp, clean scent of lemon polish, heels. And so the ritual began. After every shift, Vivian made her pilgrimage. She walked to the library, and in its hushed cathedral of shelves, she began to forge an arsenal. She did not merely read. She vivisected the language of finance, heels. Accounting texts were dismantled, their skeletons laid bare. Tax law was reverse-engineered, its brutalist architecture mapped onto the empty spaces of her mind. She inhaled the histories of men who had built empires from nothing, heels, watched them turn to ash, and then impossibly had raised them from the dust again. For a long, silent season, she became a ghost haunting the schematics of shell corporations and offshore trusts, a legal pad her only confidant, heels, filling page after page in a script that was no longer her own. This was the precise angular handwriting of someone else, a new and terrible architect of fate, not Vivian Hale. She wasn't aware of it, not then, but she was preparing methodically, heels, for war, heels. She called it survival, a strategy to keep from splintering into 1,000 pieces. But in the dark room of her soul, a different self was being assembled, piece by painstaking piece, a new image slowly developing, burning itself into existence. Heels. They had made her sign her own name away, a clerical execution that had erased her from the very company she had poured her life into building. So be it. The one asset they could not seize, could not liquidate, was her memory. And her memory was a vault, heels, perfect and cold, eidetic. Adrian himself had often said so, usually just before turning it against her like a weapon in some forgotten argument. You never let anything go now, it was her weapon, heels. She could close her eyes and see the entire corporate superstructure of Cole Hale. She could walk the labyrinth of its shell companies, recall the faces of its partners, its suppliers, heels, the financial institutions that were the pillars holding up the grand facade. She knew who owed Adrian favors, and more importantly, who Adrian owed. She remembered exactly which accountants were loyal and which he considered expendable, heels. On a yellow legal pad, in the tomb-like quiet of the library on a rain-swept Tuesday 4 months into her new life, she bled it all onto the paper, purely from memory. The final document was 43 pages. She took that pad, slid it beneath the thin mattress of her cot, and for the next year and a half, she forced herself to forget it was there. Heels. 6 months into this exile, Rhoda glanced up from a column of figures. Vivian, she asked. Lang, isn't it? Vivian Lang? Yes. You ever plan on telling me who you really are? Probably not. Fair enough. Rhoda's pen scratched across a pink slip of paper, heels, which she then slid across the worn surface of the desk. Vivian picked it up. A name, Abriel Moss, and a number. Friend of mine, Rhoda explained, her voice lowering into a conspiratorial hush. Handles payroll for a group of shipping firms down the coast. Heels. Needs someone sharp, someone who gets discretion. Plus, it's a real city. Not this backwater. I suspect that might suit you. No, Rhoda said, the word a final, unarguable judgment. You don't, Heels. You're just too damn scared to move. Vivian could only stare at the small pink rectangle in her hand, Heels. She looked at Rhoda, with her defiant spray of red hair and a sweater with a cartoon cat knitted on it, the only person who had felt anything like a friend in half a year. Rhoda, she began, her voice a thin, fragile thing. Why are you doing this for me, Heels? Rhoda just shrugged, a simple movement that dismissed the entire question. Because you're wasting a first-class mind in what used to be my dentist's office. And because a couple of months after you showed up, heels. I started following a story in the business pages, started connecting a few dots, figured it wasn't my place to say a word. But if the kind of people who sign checks for that woman in that story ever decide to come looking, well, heels. I figure the more miles between here and you, the better. Heels. An absolute silence fell in the small office. Not my business, Rhoda promised. I'm just saying you should call Abriel, and so she did. 2 weeks later, she was on a bus heading 3 states south, a single larger suitcase in the compartment below. Heels. Bound for a port city she'd never seen, a place where the air hung thick with brine and diesel fumes, and where for 400 miles in any direction, no one had ever heard the name Vivian Hale. Abriel Moss, as it happened, heels, was a 5-foot-tall black woman in her late 50s with a voice like gravel tumbling in a tin can and a faded mermaid tattoo on her forearm, the story of which was never told. Heels. She ran her operation from the second floor of a building that had been a hat factory in 1923 and now held a scattering of immigration lawyers and one very confused-looking dentist. Heels. Abriel hired Vivian on the spot, the entire transaction conducted over coffee in a diner across from the bus station. I don't give a damn about the person who just walked through that door, Abriel said, her gaze direct. Heels. I care about the person who shows up Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. You be that person, we won't have a problem. I'll be there. Rhoda says you're sharp. I can manage. Rhoda doesn't call people sharp, so you're sharp. Cut the modesty. It's boring. Heels. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, the corner of Vivian's mouth twitched, a muscular echo of a smile. You have a place to stay? Not yet. Flat above the office. Smells a little like mothballs. You can have it for what it costs me. Heels, which is nothing. Landlord owes me. Want it? Yes. Done. Let's go. Heels. And just like that, with a speed that felt like whiplash, Vivian Lang had a home, a one-bedroom apartment over a payroll office in a city of murky green water, and the mournful cry of nocturnal foghorns. For the next 11 months, this was her world. Heels. And it was here on a Thursday night the following February that her path was destined to finally cross with that of Roman Vercetti. She, of course, had no idea who he was. The name Vercetti was just a sound, meaningless. Heels. Abriel's company serviced the books for nearly 24 shipping firms. Most were legitimate. Some, as Vivian learned within her first 3 weeks, were decidedly not. Heels. She understood very quickly that the clients who lived in the shadows were a subject you did not speak of. Heels. She just processed the numbers she was given, quietly noting the anomalies for Abriel, who would then make them disappear. On the Thursday that changed everything, Abriel was at a funeral on the other side of the country, and Vivian was in charge. Heels. It was nearly 8 p.m. She was seconds from closing the monthly books when the intercom crackled to life. She glanced at the clock, then the locked outer door. She pressed the talk button. We're closed. I have an appointment. Not with me. Heels. It's with Abriel Moss. Ms. Moss is out of town. The office is closed. There was a pause, then a new voice came through, deeper, with an unnerving trace of amusement. Are you the one who flagged the Moreno invoices? Heels. Vivian's fingers went rigid on the button. The Moreno invoices. 3 weeks ago, she'd found a ghost in the machine, a set of subtly altered shipping receipts, a quiet little test to see if anyone was watching. Heels. She had typed a one-page summary and left it on Abriel's desk. Good catch, Hon, Abriel had said the next morning. I got it. For Vivian, the case was closed. Who is this? She demanded into the intercom. A friend of Ms. Moss. The name is Vercetti. Heels. Roman Vercetti. We go back a long way. I would be grateful for 5 minutes of your time. Vivian held her breath. You can watch me on the security camera, the voice offered, his calm a disquieting thing. I will stand in the open. Heels. I'll even raise my hand so you can see they are empty. I just need to come upstairs. It's about the invoices. She flicked her eyes to the small black and white monitor in the corner. Heels. This was the situation. A man stood in the lobby 1 floor down. The camera's poor resolution swallowed his features, leaving only a silhouette in a dark coat, his hands hanging limp at his sides. Every nerve ending she possessed screamed danger. Heels. Screamed to call Abriel now. Her mind flashed to the 4-inch letter opener lying in her desk drawer, but the voice that came out of her was not her own. Come up, it said, the tone impossibly level. Slowly. The door is unlocked. Heels. Take the chair in front of my desk. Do not touch anything. His only response was, ma'am, and he began to climb. The first thing she noticed as he stepped into the light was that he was older than his voice. Early 40s, maybe 45. He was tall, heels, but not in a way that crowded the room. Heels. The gray streaking his temples looked like an artist's choice, a deliberate brush of silver, but it was not. His face was less an arrangement of features and more a work of architecture, all hard lines and grim purpose. His eyes held the dark, a thin, heels. White line of a scar cut a path from his left brow straight into the hairline. The coat he wore cost more than the vehicle she'd bought half a year ago. With a slow, liturgical grace, he drew off a pair of leather gloves, folding them into a pocket. Heels. He took the chair she'd indicated, but his hands remained out of sight. One elbow was planted firmly on the arm of the chair. Heels. The other hand rested on his thigh. He just watched her. The silence stretched, becoming a tangible weight in the room. Men had stared at Vivian her entire life, with hunger, with scorn, with the flat disinterest of a passing glance. But never, not once, Heels, had she been seen like this. It struck her then. He was looking at her the way a general studies a map before a battle. You're lame. A new name. I'm afraid I don't understand. I said, he articulated, each syllable a precisely cut stone. Heels. That name is recent. It was not yours 3 years ago. Her heart seized, a painful, violent clench inside her ribs. Her face remained a blank canvas. I don't know what you're talking about, Messrs. Lang. He leaned forward, the motion barely perceptible. Heels. I'm not here to be a problem for you. In fact, a pause, a clearing of his throat. I am the exact opposite of a problem. Heels. If my purpose was to cause you trouble, I would hardly have announced myself. Surely you see that? No, I don't. Then let me be clear. Your former life could not matter less to me. It is your current life that holds my interest. Heels. And it holds my interest because 3 weeks ago, you saw a ghost in my accounts. An anomaly that 2 certified accountants, one of whom I employ, failed to see. I pay those men a fortune specifically to see ghosts. You found it. Part-time. Heels. From a room above a dead hat factory. That gets my attention. It is the only reason I am in this chair. She said nothing. Abriel speaks very highly of you. Abriel speaks highly of anyone who arrives on time. Heels. No, he says, the word landing with the finality of a closing door. She does not. A heavy quiet falls between them. Far out on the harbor, a foghorn cries out 3 times, a long, sorrowful call from some other, colder world. What do you want? Heels. Mr. Vercetti? She finally asks. Roman, he leans forward once more. I am offering you a position. I have a position, I'm aware. Then what is this? Because, he started, his voice a low vibration in the small room. Heels. The position I offer has a salary, 18 times what Abriel pays you. It has an apartment that is not saturated with failure and dust. Heels. And it is open because the man who held it retired to a vineyard 3 months ago, leaving me increasingly strained in my search for his replacement. She could only stare. And she knew, with a deep, Heels, cellular certainty that needed no proof, that this man was danger. Not the wild, careless danger of Adrian, who might burn your world down by accident. Heels. No, this was a different kind of threat entirely. This was a man who had at some point in his life consciously decided to end another, and had made his peace with it. He would do it again if the equation demanded it. Heels. She knew this in the same way an animal knows fire, without ever having to feel the burn. Every instinct she possessed was screaming. And still, I don't know who you are, she says, her voice a steady line. A reasonable objection. Heels. And I prefer to know who you are before we speak of employment. He nods, a small motion, as if this were a scripted part of the exchange. With agonizing slowness, he reaches inside his coat. A flinch she can't suppress makes him freeze. Heels. Then proceed with even more deliberate care, pulling out a slim leather folio. He sets it on the desk, a silent offering. Heels. Inside are 3 pages, he says. The first is an inventory of my business ventures. Some are clean, some less so. The second page is a description of the work itself. The third is a list of things I will not do and will not permit my people to do. Heels. That page is the most important one. And what is on it? Narcotics, he says, ticking off the points of his creed. Children, the trafficking of human beings, and any transaction involving a woman that does not have her absolute consent. Those 4. Heels. I have other lines, but those are my articles of faith. And everything else is everything else, he confirms. I move things. I charge what the world will bear. Heels. I protect those who buy my protection, and I hurt those who have it coming. I gave up pretending about what I am a very long time ago. That's a well-rehearsed speech. I've had to give it before. To who? To every person who works inside my circle. Heels. I am telling you now so we do not have complications later. People who are disappointed become people who cannot be trusted, and I'm supposed to just believe you. No, you should not, he counters. You should call Abriel tomorrow, ask her. Then, Heels. Call a woman named Sophia. I've put her number in the file. She was my accountant for 11 years. She will give you an honest picture of the man I am. Then you can make up your own mind. Eels. She let his words hang in the dead air of the office. The light was terrible. Half of Roman's face was swallowed by shadow. He just waited, without a trace of impatience. Eels. He had the kind of stillness found in predators who have waited for much more difficult prey than her. Why me, she asks at last. He tilts his head. I've already answered that. You gave me the business case. I want the real reason. Eels. He is quiet for a long beat. Then the barest hint of a smile touches his mouth. It never reaches his eyes, but it feels like the first true thing she's seen on his face. Because Abriel told me a story, he says. Eels. About a woman who showed up at her door 1 year ago with one suitcase, a haircut that looked like it was done with shears, and a gift for numbers her last employer must be cursing himself for losing. Eels. Abriel told me that story 3 months ago, well before I knew you were the one cleaning up my ledgers. The woman in the story, she was interesting. The work in my ledgers was interesting. When I learned they were the same person, I came to find you. Eels. That sounds like a lot of trouble. It was a minor detour. Don't flatter yourself, he says, a sliver of humor in his voice. I was in the area anyway. A laugh escapes her, a short, sharp sound that surprises both of them. He watches her, Eels, and a muscle near his jaw tightens, and she sees it, and he knows she saw it. For the first time, he breaks his gaze, looking down at the desk. Eels. It was the first time he had looked away from her since he walked in. I'll think about it, she says. Take all the time you need. And how much time do I have? As much as it takes. You have the number. If you decide against it, I will not bother you again. Eels. You won't? No. Even after I fixed your books? You did me a service. That does not mean you owe me a debt. He stands and retrieves his gloves. He gives one short, sharp nod, then stops at the door. Mrs. Lang. Yes? He doesn't turn, speaking to the door frame. Eels. Whatever happened before you came to this city, I have no need to know, and I have no desire to know. Eels. I just need you to understand that I am not looking into it. The person I'm interested in is the woman sitting in that chair. That is who I would be hiring, if you agree. And then he was gone. His steps receded down the stairs and into the night. Eels. She sat there for 20 minutes before her limbs would obey her. The folder was a dark shape on her desk. The only sounds were the harbor, the distant scream of a cat, and the radiator, ticking like a tired heart. The next morning, she phoned Abriel. Oh, Eels. Dear, Abriel said. So he found you. I know, of him. How well? Enough. He keeps his word. Those 4 things he forbids? It's a religion to him. I saw him throw a man through a plate glass window for breaking 2 of them. Eels. He is a hard man, and he has his darkness, but he is loyal to his own. Loyalty like that is a kind of God. Abriel, I know. Are you sure about this? My dear, nothing you have done for the last year has been a good idea. You've been a ghost. Eels. A rumor, just trying to stay alive. This is a way out of the dark, and yes, I think you're ready. Why? Because I'm the one who told him about you. That's right, I sent the wolf to your door. The guilt ate me alive before I picked up the phone. Eels. Vivian was completely silent. Eels. Look, I can't make you do this, Abriel went on. But I've known him for 21 years. He is not capable of love. He barely tolerates most human beings. But every so often he sees someone, and it's like watching a legend unfold. Eels. The last time I saw that look in his eyes, well, she's his head of logistics now, and she's richer than a queen. Her name is Sophia. She's waiting for you to call. Vivian called. Sophia answered on the second ring. Eels. And then she spoke for 47 minutes without a single pause. He is not a good man. Not in the way the world understands it, Sophia said. But he is not an evil man, not like the kind of evil you're running from. Eels. He is a man who contains 2 opposing natures and has somehow found peace with both. But the bedrock truth is this. The man keeps his word. If he promises you will not be asked to do a thing you won't, I would wager my life on that fact. I have. A deep Eels. Charged silence hung between them on the line before Vivian's question was answered. No, she finally breathed, the word ablade. Believe me, I have put that question under a microscope 1,000 times. No, I regret so many things. Eels. But that is not one of them. Vivian took the job. Not that week, or even that month. She said yes in April on a perfectly average day when the city's trees let their blossoms go, scenting the air with a fleeting, almost suffocating sweetness. Eels. She agreed to the terms in a faceless diner, over a breakfast that went uneaten. Across from her, Roman Vercetti dismantled a piece of dry toast, his coffee black, his heavy coat, a piece of armor he would not remove. Let's be clear on one point, she stated, Eels, before any hand could be offered. I am here for the money and the residence, and because Sophia put her name to yours, this isn't for you. Understood. I can't imagine what you were thinking, walking into my office that day in February. Eels. I wasn't thinking, Miss Lang. You were thinking something. The spoon in his cup turned, an endless circular motion. I thought, he said, each word placed with the care of a man disarming a bomb, Eels, that you were a woman who had walked through her own private hell. That was all. I never thought past that. Eels. And I'm not thinking past it now. Good, good. Then we're clear. Perfectly. But clarity was an illusion. What they had was a professional contract, which is a different universe entirely. She moved into the apartment. Eels. A cavernous hollow on the top floor of one of his buildings, its balcony gazing into the sheer black nothingness of the water. Then she met the crew. Sophia, a tiny woman in her 60s with eyes like scalpels and a long silver braid, Eels, bypassed all formality and simply pulled her into a hug. I'm so glad you came, she whispered into her ear. I was worried you wouldn't. Vivian didn't weep. The muscle for it had atrophied sometime in March. It was a near thing, though, Eels. The job was just a job. This, however, this was something else. Eels. From nothing, she built new ledgers. She painstakingly reconstructed the entire financial framework that for 11 years had lived only in Sophia's head and the force of her will. Not 2 months in, she found them. A second set of books, a ghost ledger. Eels. She followed the trail of numbers like a thread of blood to a dock supervisor, Mancini. Roman's people dealt with him in a way she knew never to ask about. She just bowed her head and did the work. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Eels, she began to sleep, 7 full hours every night. She saw Roman maybe twice a week, sometimes not at all. He would just appear in her 4th-floor office, materializing in the chair across from her desk. Always the same chair. He would sit, Eels, an elbow resting on the arm of the chair, a silent, watchful shadow. Eels. He'd ask about some tiny detail of her work and then just listen. He never once cut her off. When she was done, he would give a quiet thank you rise and be gone. There was no flirtation between them. Not from him, not from her. Eels. But the moments began to collect, like dust motes in a beam of light. Around the 6th month, she'd turn from a filing cabinet to find his eyes on her, his gaze snapping back to his papers a heartbeat too late. Or she would laugh at something Sophia said, Eels, and he'd be standing in the doorway, a raw, undefended look on his face before the mask of stone slid back down. Then, one night in August, a restaurant he owned exploded into chaos. An incident. The phone rang at 2 in the morning. She went. Eels. The business was in her name. Something had happened in the alley, and the police would be there at dawn. The books needed to tell a new story by then. Eels. There was no one else. No one else awake at 2 a.m. who could perform that very particular type of magic with numbers. She walked into the restaurant at 2:45. Roman was there. He sat alone in a back booth, his perfect white shirt marred by a single, Eels, stark drop of blood on the cuff. One drop. She never asked. She slid in across from him, opening her laptop. For 3 uninterrupted hours, she worked in a void of pure silence. When she was finished, she turned the screen toward him. Eels. Across 6 spreadsheets, she laid out the new truth she had built. She showed him exactly what the police would find, and she showed him everything they never would. He studied it for a long, still moment. Then his eyes lifted to hers. Vivian, Eels, he said. It was the first time the name had ever passed his lips. Eels. She had never told him it was her first name. Every document read Vivian Lang, that other name that was meant to be dead and buried. She ignored the sound of it. Yes, thank you. You're welcome. He reached over the table, not for her hand, Eels, but to let the tip of his finger graze the edge of her laptop as if the machine itself was a conduit for contact. Go home, he said. Get some sleep. Don't come in tomorrow. The morning will be enough. The ghost of a smile touched his mouth. The morning, Eels, he agreed. She left at 6, into a sky the color of a fresh bruise. Driving home, the cold air blasting through the windows, for the first time since Adrian Cole had systematically taken her life apart, a single lucid thought surfaced. Right now, Eels, I am not afraid of a single thing. Eels. Not afraid. It wasn't love what she felt for him. It was something harder to name. It was the feeling of finding a door that swings open after a year of throwing your body against a solid brick wall. Their first kiss wouldn't happen for another 4 months, Eels. When it came, it was stripped of all drama. It arrived at the end of a furious argument over a contract, close to 11 on a Tuesday night in his office. He said something that made her laugh, and without thinking, Heels. She reached out and grabbed the lapel of his coat. He looked down at her hand, and then his eyes shot back to hers. "Don't do that," he said, his voice a bare whisper, "unless you mean it." Heels. "And what if I do? Then do it again." So she did. They were married 10 months later. A quick, sterile transaction in the chambers of a judge who'd owed Roman a debt since 1998. Sophia was the only witness. Vivian wore a green dress. Roman, Heels, at her request, wore the same coat he'd had on the night they met. Afterwards, they drove down the coast to a small house he owned on a cliff. They sat on the porch and watched the sun bleed into the ocean. "Are you absolutely sure about this?" Heels, he asked the horizon, and she answered, "I'm sure." He turned away from her. "You don't know me." "Not really." She just held his gaze. "I know enough." He just shook his head, a slow, sad motion. "You don't." Heels. "Roman, stop," she said, and he did. Theirs was not a union of convention. She knew this. He was not a gentleman, nor did he become one for her. Heels. He was still the man who could come home at 3 in the morning with blood on his sleeve and a terrifying emptiness in his eyes. And she was still the woman who knew better than to ask. Their marriage was a thing built in the vast, quiet spaces between them. Heels. But in the words they did speak, there was a savage honesty she had never experienced with Adrian. Roman never pretended to be tender. When it came, it was in small, quiet gestures, real, and never for an audience. Heels. He would bring her coffee, made just so, without her ever having to ask. He saw which shoes hurt her feet and had them replaced without comment. In a crowded room, he would stand just behind her, his hand a constant, firm pressure at the small of her back. Heels. And slowly, over 2 years and then 3, she began to feel whole again. She wasn't Vivian Hale. That woman was gone forever. But she wasn't the ghost Vivian Lang either. That scared animal hiding from the light. She was someone else. Heels. Someone who ran her husband's legitimate ventures with a cold precision that made powerful men trip over their own apologies. Someone who could walk into a gala on Roman's arm and own the room, just like she had a lifetime ago. Heels. Only now the room was hers. And no one in it knew who she really was, or the name of the husband she had locked away in memory. They could never guess that the woman in the midnight blue gown, Heels, with her hand resting on the arm of a man who radiated quiet danger, had once been the wife of someone in another city who thought he could throw her away like trash. They had no idea. But one of them, deep into their 3rd year together, Heels, lets a name fall at a party. Adrian Cole, some man says. You hear about Cole Hale, lost the Sheridan account. Word is, the whole operation will be gone by Christmas, and Roman, who had been turning to speak to someone, Heels, feels her go completely rigid beside him. The smallest tremor, the kind of shift only a man who knows the rhythm of his wife's breathing would ever detect. He didn't say a word. Heels. Not that night. He waited. He waited for the morning light to spill across the cliffside porch of their weekend escape, for the aroma of coffee to settle in the air. He placed his cup down, the sound of ceramic on wood, a small sharp report in the quiet. Heels. Who is Adrian Cole? The question was simple. She only looked at him. For a full minute, nothing existed but the space between their eyes. Then, with a slow grace, she set her own cup aside, vanished into the house, Heels, and returned bearing a yellow legal pad, the same one she'd pulled from under a mattress in a hollowed-out apartment years before. Its edges were soft with wear, its 43 pages dense with a script she could hardly claim as her own. Heels. She laid it on the iron table between them, a final, heavy truth. "Read this," she said. "When you're done, I have one question for you." And so he read. It took nearly an hour of complete silence. Heels. From time to time, a breeze from the ocean would try to steal a page, and she would reach out, pressing it flat again. Heels. When he finished, he closed the pad. His gaze found hers. His face was a mask, perfectly blank, the same canvas he'd worn in Abrielle's office the day they first met. But the hand on the table turned, palm up, an offering. "Ask me," he said. She drew a breath. Heels. Finally setting free the words she had held prisoner for 3.5 years. Words that never found voice in Teresa's kitchen, or Rhoda's office, or Abrielle's apartment. Words absent even from her own wedding vows. Heels. The words that had been a burning ember in her soul. "Roman," she said, her voice steady, "I want to go home." He didn't answer right away. He just moved the legal pad to the side and stared toward the horizon, the wind playing with the collar of his shirt. Heels. For a long while, the only sound was the sea chewing on the rocks below. Heels. Then, he asked, "Home?" "Yes. Yes. Not the home we've been making?" "No." A single, slow, deliberate nod. He lifted his coffee cup, surely cold by now, and drained it without flinching. He set it down again. Heels. Vivian, he began, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think about it, truly, okay? Do you want this because you actually want it? Heels. Or is it because you've planned it for so long you can't tell the difference between a real objective and a conclusion you've already decided is inevitable? She didn't rush her answer. She let almost a full minute pass. The wind lifted a corner of the pad, Heels, and she smoothed it down, her eyes locked on his. I don't know, she said at last. Maybe both. I think it started as a thing I had to do to survive. The research, all the notes. Heels. I was drowning, Roman. I needed something solid to hold, and that was the only thing I could see. Because it was the life I had just been violently thrown out of. But then the drowning stopped. I met you, Heels, and some part of me thought, maybe I could just let it all go to the bottom, hide that yellow pad forever, and just be someone else. Your wife. A woman who looks after your money and gets old on this porch. For a very long time, I truly thought I had let it go, Heels. And then at a party, someone said his name. That's all it took. Someone just said his name. He didn't move a muscle. This isn't about him, she whispered. You have to believe me. It has nothing to do with him as a man. If he had just broken it off, Heels given me my share and said, sorry, Viv. Heels. I found someone else. I never would have bought that legal pad. I would have grieved for a year maybe, and then married a dentist in Connecticut. But that isn't what this is. This is Roman, Heels. He did it in a room where 300 people were looking right at me. He spent 6 months quietly stripping my name from company papers, and then he publicly shamed me in front of 300 people. He had a speech ready, Heels. He had his girlfriend come out on stage and showed her off like a prize. And then after I was gone, he called the police. Can you believe that? He sixed the police on me. Said I stole from him. From him, Heels. He had his lawyer call every bank we used and freeze every account with my name on it before my plane had even left the runway. Heels. A truth I never knew, a truth I never told, not until now, I see. Roman, I don't care about his sorrow. Sorry doesn't cost a thing, an apology's paper thin. I don't even need him to suffer. I require him to see. I need him in a seat, one chair, Heels. A single chair in a bare room with me standing there in front of him. I need him to look at my face and finally comprehend the sheer specific scale of his mistake. I want to see that understanding break in his eyes, and then I will turn around and walk out, Heels. That's the whole plan. That's it. And where do I fit into this? The empire, she said. That whole structure is going to fall apart on its own. The cracks are already there. I've seen them for a year. What I want is the room, the chair, Heels, the moment of clarity. Everything else is just noise. For a long moment, Roman just watched her. You never say the word revenge, he observed. I don't own that word, Heels. And why is that? Because it isn't mine to claim. Revenge is for people who were cheated out of what they deserved. I got what I deserved. I have a life. I have you. This is not revenge, Roman. This is balancing the books. For 3.5 years, Heels, he has run a business on a foundation of lies, and I am simply going back to correct the ledger. That is all. And then I'm coming home. His hand moved across the small iron table, coming to rest over hers, pinning the notepad down. All right, he said. All right, Heels. Yes, we will do it. Roman, Vivian, you don't have to do this. I know. He squeezed her hand once, a firm, final pressure. I'm doing it anyway, because you asked, and because I need to see him. Don't, Heels. I need to see the man who is responsible for what happened to you. I want to be in the same room as him. Heels. I will not touch him. I give you my absolute word. You asked for a chair, a room, and his understanding, and that is exactly what you'll get, but I will be in that room. Why? Because I want him to know that you have someone now. To know who you have, Heels, and everything that means. I want that image burned into his memory for the rest of his life, a ghost he sees every time he closes his eyes. She didn't fight him on it. She could have. But she didn't. They moved with purpose. That was Roman's way. Heels. Rushing was for the desperate, for those who lacked the luxury of time. And they had all the time in the world. Their preparations took 4 months. During that time, Vivian, from a climate-controlled office high in one of Roman's towers, Heels, rebuilt Adrian's entire world from memory, from Sophia's research, from 3 private detectives, and from a woman named Jean, Adrian's assistant for 12 years who left his company in Heels. 2019 after something happened, an incident she would not describe, but Vivian knew its shape without asking. Jean lived a different life now, in a totally new field. But she had also kept things. Copies of many, Heels, many things she was never supposed to have. When a third party reached out with a very large offer, Jean gave up everything. telling Sophia it felt like putting down a terrible weight. Feels. The picture Vivian pieced together over those 4 months made even Roman raise an eyebrow. The empire Adrian Cole had built wasn't an empire at all. It was a joke, held together by nothing but nerve and tape. A paper kingdom, it seemed, Eels, since at least 2021. His main business had been bleeding money for 3 years straight, a fact hidden by a frantic shuffle of short-term loans. Eels. 2 of those loans came from men Roman knew personally and detested completely. Adrian had sold off the Sheridan contract for a staggering loss just to cover a margin call the past December. Eels. He was leveraged to the breaking point against a building he didn't even completely own. And Camille Devereaux, the woman he showed off to 300 people, had her name on a civil suit in another state from 2023, Eels, tied to some investment scam. It was a small thing Adrian's lawyers made disappear, but the files still existed, waiting for someone who knew to look on the servers of a little Midwestern law firm that Sophia's people slipped into without a whisper. Eels. The only thing keeping the whole Cole Hale illusion afloat was the power of Adrian's reputation. Eels. He had a knack for it, sitting across from a banker, using that smile and that deep voice to create a picture of unbreakable success. For now he was standing, but it was the steadiness of a man juggling 9 chainsaws on fire. One slip, that's all it would take. Eels. Sophia, watching from the office, was not impressed. "He's a fool," she said, poking at his loan papers. "A foolish, proud man. I almost feel sorry for him. Almost." Then she remembered the look on Vivian's face that first month at Abriel's. On second thought, Eels, no. Don't, Sophia, defend me. Not like that. Eels. It will only make me cry, and I am completely done with crying in this office. Sophia just patted her hand. Then go find a nicer place to cry. The plan they created was subtle. Brutal but subtle. Vivian insisted on it. No big explosions. Eels. No press frenzy. No public arrests. No, she wanted his world to slowly, painfully pull apart at every seam. She wanted Adrian Cole to wake up on Monday and find a supplier had simply vanished. Tuesday, another one gone. Wednesday, Eels. His bank politely asks for an urgent meeting. Never a good sign. Thursday, his main investor, a friend of Roman's, casually pulls out of their partnership for reasons he can't seem to explain. Eels. Theirs was not an assault of direct force. No, not in the old way. It was a campaign of whispers, of phone calls that landed like stones in a still pond. Quietly, they illuminated truths everyone already knew but had buried under the weight of Adrian's charisma. Eels. It was the simple act of presenting the truth, unadorned, and then letting gravity do its work. And then Vivian spoke into the dusk on the evening they were to leave. "We go to the event. The charity gala. That's the one. He will be there." Eels. He cannot resist it. It's where he goes to polish his own reflection. "Viv, yes? Are you sure you can do this part? Walk into that room?" "I am. He'll be there, with his wife, Camille, the one from last year, and the photographers. Eels and 300 guests." Eels. "I'm aware. The last time you were in a place like that with him. I know what happened, Roman. But don't you dare think I'm walking into this unprepared for the pain." She turned to him then. They were in their sanctuary, Eels, the house on the cliff where only the truth was spoken. She wore a simple robe, he a t-shirt and sweats, a version of him almost no one was ever permitted to see. He looked younger, and his concern for her was a physical thing in the room. Eels. "It won't hurt me in the way you're afraid of," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "You can't know that. I can. I can, because that woman, she is not me anymore. The woman he broke is gone." Eels. "She died on a plane over some forgotten ocean, Roman. The person who walks into that gala is not her. He has no power over this person. The tools he used to shatter her simply no longer exist." He watched her, really watched her, Eels, for a long, silent beat. "I believe you," he finally said. "I still wish this wasn't the way, I know, but I see why I have to." "I know, all right." He pulled her into his arms, and for the first time in a long time, Eels, she simply let herself be held. They stood like that for an age. They landed in the city she'd escaped 3 years and 8 months ago on a Wednesday. The light was different here, she realized. Sharper, almost golden. She'd forgotten that detail, Eels, until the plane broke through the clouds and she saw it reflecting off the glass towers, and a small, sharp breath she couldn't control escaped her lips. Eels. Roman felt it. He didn't look at her. He just reached over the space between them and closed his hand over hers. They ignored all the grand, familiar hotels. Instead, they moved into a ghost apartment Roman kept through a shell corporation, Eels, located in a neighborhood that was a ruin in her memory, but was now blooming with minimalist single-word restaurants. She slept that first night, deeply. She had braced herself for a long vigil, haunted by the echo of his voice, eels, by the phantom sound of breaking glass, but instead, 8 hours of uninterrupted silence. She woke to Roman setting a coffee on her nightstand, his voice a low murmur. It started. Which part? The bank. This early? Eels. You said you wanted it to be slow, he smirked. You never said anything about it starting late. Eels. A ghost of a smile touched her lips against the pillow. By the end of that week, 40 floors up inside a tower that wore his name like a crown, Adrian Cole was staring at the same bleak financial reports for the third day running. Eels. A muscle under his left eye had begun to jump. The tell, the little tremor that always preceded the collapse of his world. Camille, his new wife, who was far shrewder than she ever let on, stood in the doorway of his office asking what was wrong. Eels. He told her it was nothing. Someone in that office sent the report to Sophia. Sophia passed it to Vivian. And Vivian? She just listened, her composure absolute, and gave the order. Let it burn. The bank meeting was Thursday. Eels. His main supplier went dark on Friday. By Monday, certain quiet conversations had been had between men who mattered. Eels. And by Wednesday of the second week, Adrian Cole was making his own calls, and he was finding that no one, absolutely no one, was picking up the phone. He still had no idea what was truly happening. That was Vivian's one rule. He wasn't allowed to know. Eels. Not until the fundraiser. That morning, Vivian Verschetti stood before the mirror in a penthouse he never knew existed, and she looked at a woman she didn't recognize. This woman was wearing a gown the color of blood spilled on silk. No jewels, no sequins. Eels. It was the kind of dress worn by a woman who is herself the event. Her hair was pulled back soft, her face almost bare. Eels. The diamonds at her throat were just a flicker of light. The watch on her wrist, a gift from Roman, was the loudest thing she wore, and even then, only a handful of people in that room would understand its silent language, its brand too sacred to need a name. Eels. She saw a woman in her late 30s who had walked through hell and had come back with souvenirs. She looked like a debt finally come to collect. Roman appeared behind her, a figure in black, his uniform for nights when destinies were rerouted. Eels. He placed his hands on her bare shoulders. Ready? No. Good. Being ready is a fantasy for amateurs. A small, sharp laugh broke from her. She turned, her hands moving to straighten his tie. One rule, he said. What? The second you want to leave. Eels. We're gone. Eels. I don't care if you're talking to God himself. Squeeze my hand twice and we evaporate. No questions. Roman, promise me. I promise. He nodded once and offered her his arm. Eels. The silence in the car on the way to the hotel was so complete she could hear the soft drum of her own pulse. The driver's eyes never once rose to meet hers in the rearview mirror. After 11 years with Roman, Eels, he knew the silence of an evening out from the silence of a reckoning. The gala was in a ballroom just 10 blocks from the life she once had with Adrian. She had been in this very room 4 times before, the same hideous green and gold carpet. Eels. The doorman was new, though. She saw no one she knew on the way in, and she was struck by the cold fact that no one here could possibly know her. Eels. To this world she had abandoned, she was a ghost, and it hit her then, the short, dark hair, the fine lines that now lived around her eyes. The very way she held herself belonged to a different universe than the woman Vivian Hale, Eels, who used to drift through these rooms. She was an error in their reality, a living specter. She could walk right past someone she'd had dinner with 50 times, and they wouldn't even register her presence. She had planned for this, Eels. But to anticipate a thing and to feel its truth slam into you in the middle of a hotel lobby, they are not the same experience. Breathe, Roman murmured at her side. I am. Slower. She did as he said. They were announced at the doorway. Eels. Verset, the man's voice boomed. Mr. and Mrs. Roman Versetti. A few heads snapped in their direction. In this world, that name meant new money, and new money often meant more money, and Vivian, Eels. In that dress the color of vengeance, she demanded a second look. A man Roman recognized from a deal over a horseback in 2019 motioned for him to come over. Roman gave a slight dip of his chin in acknowledgement, but never left her side. Eels. Who is that, she asked, her voice low. A man with a big wallet and no real power. Stay close. They moved like a single shadow deeper into the gilded fray. She did not search the crowd for Adrian. She let Roman lead, his hand afirm. Eels. Warm pressure at the small of her back. His head bent towards her, as if she were telling him the most fascinating secret in the world. Eels. Over the years, she had perfected the art of looking utterly absorbed in a conversation without saying a word. a useful trick. It kept people away. She saw Camille first. By the bar, a statue in emerald green champagne flute poised, heels, laughing at something some man was saying. She looked older. A new tightness had taken root around her mouth that hadn't been there 4 years ago. Her hair was a little blonder. She looked, Vivian decided, heels, like a woman who got the one thing she always wanted, only to learn what it would cost her. Just beyond her, with his back to the room, Adrian Cole was holding court for a small group, his laughter pitched just a little too loud, designed to carry heels. He'd gained weight, not a lot, but enough to soften the sharp lines of his jaw. His hair, once his great vanity, was in a calculated retreat from his brow. He wore a tuxedo that didn't fit him properly, not in the way his others had, heels, and she knew in an instant it wasn't a new tailor. He'd just stopped caring enough to go for a fitting. A heavy tumbler of whiskey was cradled in his hand, his voice cutting through the noise. "Look," I told him, he was saying loudly. I said, "Frank," heels. The data is the data. 2 of the 3 men with him had the blank, polite smiles of people planning their escape. She stopped moving. Roman felt the change in her and stopped too. "There," she breathed. "By the window. That little circle." Heels. "The one in the bad tuxedo." Roman's eyes found him, his own face a mask of perfect neutrality. "That's him. Yes, that's him. I thought he'd be taller. Most things about him are smaller than you'd think." They just stood there, the 2 of them. Heels. In the very center of that glittering, cavernous room for what felt like a lifetime, but was probably only 30 seconds. Adrian Cole never looked their way. He had no idea he was being watched. He was lost in his own myth, heels, telling some old story of a rival beaten, a lesser man outsmarted, a story that always ended the same way, with the other guy never seeing him coming, heels. The 2 men with him were now consulting their phones. One was staring right over Adrian's head at a woman across the room. By the bar, Camille's laughter had died. "Do you want to initiate now?" Roman asked, his voice low and private. "No." "Then when?" Heels. "After his speech." A sideways look from Roman. "He's giving a speech?" "He always does at this fundraiser." He sits on the board. "He delivers the keynote address every single year. This night is the absolute zenith of his social calendar." Heels. "How did you know he was still on the board?" I checked. A faint smile touched Roman's lips as he looked down at her. "Very well," he said, after the speech. They receded into the crowd, taking 2 champagne flutes from a passing server. Heels. Vivian never took a sip. She has needed a prop for her hands, a familiar anchor from 4 years ago in Teresa's kitchen. A woman in a sequin gold dress, the spouse of a prominent donor, began to approach them. Vivian had a vague memory of her. Heels. The woman, however, had no recognition of Vivian. She introduced herself to Roman, who was effortlessly charming. The woman prattled on about her latest philanthropic project, Heels, then inquired if the Versettis might attend another function the following month. Roman assured her his office would be in contact. The woman moved on. Across the room, Heels. Adrian Cole finally pivoted to survey his domain, that predatory sweep he always performed, hunting for his next opportunity, his next useful connection. Heels. His gaze swept right over Vivian. A complete void of recognition, not a single flicker. This from the man who was her husband for 11 years, the man who once stood before 300 people and declared her insufficient. He saw her as you would a chair, Heels, a part of the scenery, and with that some small savage thing she'd clutched inside for so long she'd forgotten its name finally released its grip. It wasn't victory, it was quieter. The feeling, she realized, Heels, was like slipping off a shoe you've worn for a decade, only to understand in that moment the constant crippling pain it caused. "He didn't see me," she breathed. "He saw you," Roman corrected. "He just couldn't process who he was seeing." Heels. "It's the same thing." Heels. "No," he corrected. "It is profoundly different." She looked up at him. "Trust me," he reiterated. "It is not." The formal remarks began at 9. The chairman spoke first, a man with a booming laugh who was also deeply, profoundly uninteresting. Heels. He seemed aware of this, peppering his speech with self-deprecating jokes that elicited perfectly timed laughter from the audience. Vivian sipped her water. Then it was Adrian's turn. He strode to the stage, fumbled with the microphone. And there, Heels, isolated in the stark glare of the spotlight, he looked precisely like a man who had spent the last 3 weeks having every one of his phone calls go unanswered. His face was slick with perspiration. He was slightly inebriated, Heels. You could even see the faint dampness on his shirt collar, but he was still Adrian Cole. He still possessed that voice, Heels. When he began to speak, the entire room seemed to lean toward him, an almost involuntary physical response. "Friends," he started. "Good evening." A few indistinct replies came from the crowd. "It is a privilege, as it is every year, Eels, to stand before you on behalf of the Belfort Committee." He spoke for 4 minutes. He spoke of the committee's incredible accomplishments this year. He spoke of children in a distant city, their images projected onto a screen behind him, Eels, and he spoke of the enormous impact their financial contributions had made. He spoke of how deeply moved he was on his personal visit to see these children last February, a visit that was a complete fiction, Eels, a trip that was in fact a golf weekend with Camille 2 states away. Vivian knew this, of course. Jean had given her the itemized receipts months ago, and Sophia had triple-checked every detail with the resort, Eels. He was reaching the crescendo, the part where he would implore the audience to give generously, to donate even more, and then he faltered. He simply stopped speaking, his eyes narrowing as he stared into the darkened room, toward a table at the back, Eels. A fraction of a second later, Vivian knew he was looking at her. Not at her precisely, but at some facet of her. The specific angle of her head, perhaps, or the sharp line of her jaw. His eyes had found her by sheer coincidence, Eels. She hadn't shifted an inch. She had done nothing to invite attention, yet his gaze snagged on her like a loose thread on a splinter of wood. He frowned. The room, sensing a disruption in the performance, felt the energy change, Eels. The collective body of the audience leaned in even closer. He opened his mouth to continue, then closed it. His eyes fell back to his notes. Eels. He looked up a second time. He said something, but the commanding resonance was gone from his voice. It was no longer a pronouncement. It was brittle. He said, thank you, all of you, Eels. Thank you for your, I want to thank. And he utterly mangled the closing line of a speech he had delivered a dozen times before. A line about lifting one another up, a line he once recited with such theatrical pride, and he could not form the words, Eels. He passed the microphone back to the chairman. He walked off the stage. He did not look her way again, but from across the ballroom she could see the back of his neck burn a deep, furious crimson. Beside her, Roman shifted his weight. He saw something. Eels, he murmured. He saw something. He doesn't know what it is yet. No, but he is about to find out. Eels. When would this happen? Now. With deliberate, measured grace, she placed her water glass on the table. Her gaze found Roman. Walk with me, she commanded, and he obeyed. They eschewed the party's chaotic heart, Eels, navigating its periphery instead, the way a predator stalks the edges of a clearing. No urgency, no visible objective. They drifted past a table of oblivious guests. A server, a Senator Vivian had once met who now looked through her as if she were glass, Eels. He certainly didn't register Roman, a figure who existed entirely outside his political calculus. Across the room, Adrian remained at his isolated table, a fresh whiskey in hand, Camille now a fixed presence at his side, Eels. She was murmuring to him, her voice a low current, but the words found no purchase. He was lost in the amber depths of his glass, his brow furrowed over a void. About 10 feet from them, Vivian halted. She simply stood, a silent monument, Eels. It took less than 5 seconds. He could sense her presence, a shift in the room's pressure. It's a primal thing. His head lifted, his gaze colliding with hers across the space, and this time there was no retreat. The color drained from his face, a sudden, Eels, violent erasure of life. She watched the process with clinical detachment, forehead, cheeks, jaw. By the time the blood fled his mouth, his lips were slack with shock. Beside him, Camille, confused, traced his line of sight. He whispered a single word, Eels, so faint it was nearly lost. No. Hello, Adrian. Camille asked Adrian, what is it? No. Eels. He lurched back a step, his hip striking the small table. The whiskey glass rocked, but by some miracle did not fall, steadied by the reflexive action of a stranger's hand. Adrian was oblivious, Eels. His entire world had collapsed to the space between himself and Vivian. His mouth remained agape. Vivian, he yelled. Ghost, what's Vivian's? Yes, Adrian. It's you. The man seemed incapable of forming a complete thought, Eels. His face became a frantic cycle of expressions, a slot machine of disbelief, fear and confusion, click, 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 never once landing on a coherent emotional state. Camille, ever quicker than her husband, finally turned her full attention to Vivian, Eels, taking in the scene with a sudden dawning horror, Eels. Then her gaze finds Roman, a silent sentinel behind Vivian, and Camille's features harden into a mask of hostility. I'm sorry, she begins, her words chosen with the care of a bomb technician. Do we know? Vivian severs the sentence. We do, Eels. Camille's mind is still a blank. I don't recall. Vivian's voice is glacial. Camille, a party. You wore red. You mentioned you'd heard all about me. And I believe I told you I hoped my husband would be everything to you that he had once been to me. Feels. A toxic crimson flooded Camille's face. Vivian, she gasped. Indeed. Oh my God. Yes. Instinctively, Camille recoiled from Adrian, a small but meaningful retreat that Vivian noted and filed away. Even then, Feels, her survival instinct was clear, distance herself from the epicenter. Feels. Adrian's voice finally returns, a ragged thing. Where? He stammers. Where have you been? Vivian. The name is a physical obstruction in his throat. Where have you been? He asks it with the entitled petulance of a man asking why dinner is late, Feels, as if he still possessed any claim to her time. The sound cracks. Vivian meets his gaze, holding it for a long, punishing moment. She gives him the look she had spent 3.5 years perfecting, the Roman look, a skill acquired through osmosis. Feels. A calm, total, slow-motion appraisal. It was the precise look one gives to a piece of damaged goods before deciding it's not even worth the effort to salvage. Feels. Adrian, the name is a flat, dead thing on her tongue. Yes, this is Roman Versetti, my husband. Adrian's head turns, a slow, arduous pivot as if the motion itself is an agony. Roman is a statue carved from granite. He extends no hand, offers no greeting, feels, gives no sign of recognition at all. He simply surveys Adrian Cole with the detached scorn one reserves for a splintered piece of furniture, an obstruction on the path to be cleared away without a second thought. Feels. We felt it was important to introduce ourselves, Vivian says, her voice a placid, lethal current, before the night was over. Because I have a feeling that things are occurring inside your business that you haven't yet begun to process. Feels. And I decided it was only right that you had a face to put to your own undoing. Adrian's mouth forms words, but they are born without sound. You, he finally pushes out. Me, this is you. I've done nothing, Adrian. Feels. There was nothing that needed doing. You were the one who drew the blueprints for your own collapse. All I did was ensure that every person who had spent years looking away from your decay finally had their eyelids pried open. That is all. Feels. I made a phone call. Roman made another. A woman by the name of Sophia, a name that means nothing to you, she made a few as well, and that perfect, hermetically sealed world where your little kingdom stands. It's been bleeding out for 3 weeks, Adrian. Feels. Because when you force people to really look at you, to take a long, hard stare that no one's bothered with for years, they see that there's nothing there at all. He tries to break in. Vivian, that's not. She speaks over him, her voice an unyielding force. Feels. I am not here to ruin you, she tells him. You've done that yourself. I am here because it was necessary for you to know it was me. Feels. I required you to understand that the woman you put on a stage and flayed in front of 300 people, the woman you brushed aside for the world as someone who just wanted different things. That woman is not dead, Adrian. Feels. She did not fade away. She did not crawl into a hole of shame and disappear. She remade herself. She became this. And what she has now, Feels, and who is at her side, it operates on a level so profoundly beyond anything you were capable of offering that it is. Honestly, Adrian, it's almost funny that you ever believed you were her summit. His eyes begin to well with tears. Feels. They draw nothing from her. The absolute vacuum of emotion is itself a shock. She had imagined, over the long years of orchestration, that seeing his pain would unlock some final cathartic release inside of her. She felt nothing. Feels. It was like bracing for a hurricane only to feel a shift in the air. Vivian, he begs, the word broken, please. No, you don't understand. The business, my accounts, all of it. Oh, but I understand it with absolute clarity. Feels. If we could speak, if we only. Look at me, Adrian, he does. I have no wish to speak with you. I do not want an apology from you. I want no part of the world you built on sand. I have no use for it. Feels. The thing you controlled was never as magnificent as you thought, and the thing I now command is more immense than I ever dreamed. I came to this place tonight for one reason, and one reason only. I wanted you to see my face, Feels, and I wanted you to know that every awful thing that is about to happen to you, every call that goes unanswered, every loan that is pulled, every venomous news story, every friend that evaporates, I needed you to know with certainty, Feels, that none of it is a stroke of bad luck. It is an audit, Feels. It is the final reconciliation of the accounts. It is a debt you didn't even know you were accumulating, and I am the one who has arrived to collect. She lets the silence stretch, lets the words sink into the space between them like stones in water. Feels. That's it, she says. That is the entirety of what I came here to tell you. Adrian's mouth opens again, a fish gasping for air then. Roman's voice, a low rumble. Vivian. She turns. Yes, is that everything? That's everything. Are you sure? Feels. I am sure. He offers her his arm. She takes it, and they leave. There is no hurry in their steps. They move as they came, following the room's perimeter, gliding past the oblivious senator, past a woman in a tragically gaudy gold dress, past the bar. Feels. Behind them, the man who was once Adrian Cole slumps into a chair, his new wife holding a careful foot of space between them, her hands offering no comfort, and the party's roar swells to fill the vacuum where his world just was. Feels. This is the nature of such places. No one saw a thing. The crowd perceived nothing. To them, it was just a woman in a red dress, leaning in to share a confidence with a couple standing by the window. Feels. It was simply another Tuesday night for the insulated and the powerful. Later, in the car slicing through the frigid geometry of a city that once belonged to her, Vivian lays her head on Roman's shoulder. She says nothing for a long, long time. Then, feels a whisper. I thought I would feel something. You don't? I feel a little lighter, that's all. I thought it would be, I don't know what I thought. You thought it would be a bigger moment. Yes, precisely. I thought it would feel bigger. Feels. Roman mulls this over for a second. The car pushes through a light as it turns from yellow to red. Feels. The driver, without instruction, raises the heat inside the car. By 2 degrees, it was bigger for him, Roman notes. Yes, and that's enough. Yes, she lets her eyes drift shut. She doesn't know it yet, not in that moment. Feels. Leaning on her husband as they leave a city she will now abandon. That the war that defined her life was not over. It was never about Adrian Cole. Not really. She didn't know that her true, final opponent had been there beside her for the whole ride. Feels. His hand resting on hers, saying almost nothing, watching a skyline that had been bleeding out while they were inside. No, she couldn't have known that yet. Feels. That knowledge would come in 6 weeks. The flight back was conducted in a profound quiet. Roman slept, which was a rare thing for him on a plane. Vivian just watched him. In slumber, the hard planes of his face would soften. Feels. Allowing a glimpse of a vulnerability that was instantly snuffed out the second he was conscious, and she found herself studying it for a long time, trying to read it like a map. Feels. In the stillness that arrives after a 4-year obsession is finally fulfilled, all she could feel was a deep and unsettling disquiet. This was meant to be the arrival of peace. Instead, it felt like walking down a long, feels, dark hall only to find that the door at the end isn't an exit. It is just the entrance to another hallway. They touched down at 4 in the morning, local time. A car was there. The house on the cliff was a black silhouette, feels, a monolith punched out of the bruised pre-dawn sky. Feels. Roman carries her luggage inside. It is one of his rituals, and makes her tea an unspoken rule after any flight. And then the clipped announcement, I'm going to bed. He is gone. She stays out on the porch, where the stars are a chaotic, feels, brilliant spray and the ocean is a constant thunder. She clutches the cup long after its contents have turned cold, the chill of the ceramic a strange comfort. In the silence, she tries to summon an image of Adrian Cole, 4,000 miles away, feels, and finds that she can't. More than that, she finds she has no desire to. The realization lands with the force of a physical blow. For 4 years, his utter destruction was her singular fantasy. Now that she'd orchestrated it, feels, he was reduced to what he had always been. A small, loud man in an ill-fitting tuxedo in a city she didn't live in anymore. Feels. He was never the villain. He was never the mountain she had to climb. He was simply a man. She would be fine, she knew about Adrian Cole. The issue was everything else that was just beginning to stir. Feels. The first hairline crack in their world showed itself 2 weeks later. A Tuesday. Roman doesn't come home for dinner. In itself, this means nothing. His absence is a frequent character in their life. Their contract was clear. Feels. She would not ask where he went, and he would not offer the information. For almost 3 years, the treaty held. She had built her entire life upon this one understanding, telling herself again and again that this was the cost of entry. Eyes wide open. Feels, no fantasies. Feels. But on this Tuesday, at 11:30 p.m., he comes in through the kitchen without turning on the lights. She can hear the faucet turn, the sound of him washing his hands for a deeply unsettling amount of time. The water runs. It keeps running. Feels. It stops for a moment, then starts again. She gets out of their bed and stands, a silhouette in the doorway. Roman! He jerks, a tremor so slight it's almost imperceptible. He keeps his back to her. You're up. I was reading. What are you doing? Feels. Washing my hands. For 20 minutes? It hasn't been 20 minutes. It has. I timed you. A heavy silence fills the space. He shuts off the water, his back still a wall between them, his hands dripping onto the dark floor. I'm fine, Viv. Heels. Is somebody dead? No. Is somebody hurt? No. Then why are you washing your hands as if, Viv, please? The use of her nickname is a strategic maneuver. It is a shield he only uses when he's trapped or desperate to shut down a line of inquiry. Heels. But his voice has a texture she has never heard before. It isn't anger. She knows the terrain of his anger intimately. This is something far closer to shame. And shame is a language Roman Versetti does not speak. 2 years ago, he'd told her, Heels, with the certainty of a glacier, that shame is just an excuse men invent to avoid owning their choices. He never looked away from the things he did. You do the thing, and then you carry it. Heels. That, he'd said, is what separates men from boys. But on this Tuesday night, he sounded like a child, and so she retreated. Come to bed when you're able, was all she said. She went back to their room, but sleep was a distant country she could not reach. Heels. At 4 a.m, Roman is still not there. She finds him in the living room, fully dressed on the sofa, not asleep but staring at the ceiling. She takes the armchair across from him. Talk to me, she says. It is a command. He won't look at her. Heels. This isn't your weight to carry, Roman. Vivian. I am your wife. I manage half of your financial portfolio. Last month I sat right next to you as we methodically unmade a human being. Do not insult me by pretending you know what I can and cannot bear. Heels. His eyes squeeze shut. Heels. Fine, he breathes. Fine, fine. I'll talk. The words come out strained. Not tonight, tomorrow, after I've slept, I will tell you everything. But tomorrow comes and brings with it only silence. So does the day after. An entire week bleeds away. Heels. Each day a quiet, agonizing turn of the screw. He carries the truth like a jagged stone in his pocket, a weight she can see in his posture but is forbidden to touch. She refuses to ask again. To push Roman is to dash oneself against a cliff. Heels. A lesson etched into her memory from their first year. And besides, some deep enduring part of her. The part forged in Adrian Cole's shadow, in Teresa's kitchen, in Abrielle's apartment, whispered for patience. Wait, let it find you. Don't hunt it down. Heels. And so she waited. The truth, when it finally broke the surface, did so on a Saturday afternoon, a detail that would later echo with a kind of profane irony. Heels. It didn't arrive in the haunted hours of the night, not in the chaos of an emergency, or through the fractured signal of a desperate call. No, it emerged on a Saturday in the stark domesticity of their kitchen. She is slicing onions. Heels. The blade a rhythmic percussion. He stands at the island, a glass of water in his hand. It starts with a simple question about a date on the calendar. She asks if his cousin Matteo will be visiting in November, because Matteo is a law of nature. Heels. An annual pilgrimage she has witnessed every year she has known Roman. He looks at her, the glass freezing halfway to his lips. He sets it down on the counter, the sound deliberate, final. Matteo's not coming in November, he says. Why not? He's just not. Heels. Viv. Not this year, not ever again. The knife in her hand comes to a rest on the board. What did you do to Matteo? He's alive. He's safe. Roman's breath escapes him in a ragged sigh. Heels. He isn't coming back, Viv. And I need you to be sitting down for this. She sits. He doesn't speak right away, choosing instead to study his own hands as if they belonged to a stranger. Heels. His eyes find the thin band of gold she slid onto his finger in a sterile courthouse almost 3 years ago. He twists it. Then his comes, so low it could be a confession whispered in an empty church to a god he long ago abandoned. Heels. Do you remember the night at the restaurant? The first time we really worked together? That August. You arrived at 2 a.m. to go over the ledgers and I had blood on my shirt. Yes. And do you remember that I never told you what happened? Yes. Heels. You never asked. No. I loved you for that. You have to know that. I think in that exact moment I fell in love with you, because you didn't ask. You just saw the work and you did it. Heels. You couldn't have known, but it was the single most romantic thing anyone had ever done for me. A beat of silence hangs in the air. Roman, I'm going to tell you what happened that night. I'm telling you because you should have known 3 years ago. Heels. And because the reason I kept it from you, it's the same reason I was trying to wash my hands clean for 20 minutes the other night. Are you ready? Yes. And so the story begins to spill from him. The telling of it consumes nearly an hour. Heels. A narrative from which he spares her not a single damning detail. He speaks of a young woman, an employee in one of his more peripheral businesses, a venture whose purpose she had never fully grasped. It wasn't in the folder he gave her at Abrielle's. Heels, not drugs. Heels. Not trafficking. Nothing that violated his 4 cardinal rules. This was something else, an enterprise he'd always kept shrouded in ambiguous terms. The woman's name was Elena, She was 24 years old, and in the execution of her work, heels, she stumbled upon secrets no one is ever supposed to learn. Elena never tried to sell what she knew. Roman emphasizes this, says it twice for effect. By every measure, she had done nothing wrong. But Elena had started talking about leaving heels. She was in love with a man who knew nothing of the world she truly inhabited. She wanted out. She told another member of the crew that she just wanted to disappear. Heels, a new life, a complete and total erasure. But a man in Roman's organization named Luca, a man who had stood by his side since they were 18, saw it differently. This was the Luca who back in 2014, heels, had stepped in front of a bullet meant for Roman in a forgotten parking lot. He made a decision on his own authority that a woman who wants to simply walk away from the world of Roman Vercetti is a liability that cannot be tolerated. Heels. So Luca took care of it. On the very same night, Vivian showed up at the restaurant to balance the books. The blood on Roman's shirt, it wasn't Elena's, it was Luca's. Because when Roman found out what had been done that night, he went to the restaurant, heels, waited in the pitch-black alley, and beat the man he called his brother with his own 2 hands until he was a breath away from death. Almost. But not quite, heels. It was enough for 6 weeks in a black market hospital, followed by a one-way ticket out of the country, carrying an unspoken but perfectly clear message: never come back. But the girl Elena was still gone. And Roman, the man of principles, heels, who drew a hard line at trafficking, at children, at drugs, he hadn't killed her. He hadn't ordered it. In fact, when he learned of it, he almost obliterated the man who did. And yet, Roman was the creator of the machine, heels, and Luca was merely one of its most essential parts. Roman gave him the job. For 2 decades, Roman had trusted Luca's instincts. And in the suffocating darkness, heels, Roman Vercetti knew there was no real difference between the man who decided Elena had to die and the man who built and profited from a world where that decision, heels, could even be made without asking. This was the specter, the secret he carried into their life together. The same poison that had leached into their marriage 3 years later as they sat on that cliffside porch. I should have told you, he says at last, heels, before we were married. Yes, I didn't because I was afraid. I was terrified that if you knew, you would see me as something else. And the way you looked at me then, Vivian. No one had ever seen me that way. Not once. I was 42 years old, heels. And for the first time, I was seen as a man. I was always a function, a title. Everyone saw the role, even Sophia, and she loves me. But she sees the position, heels. You saw a man. And I couldn't bear to say the one thing that might make that light in your eyes go out. So I didn't tell you. So you didn't. And tonight, his voice fractures. He pulls a hand down his face as wiping away a ghost. Tonight, heels, I washed my hands for so long because something else happened. Different setting, different person, not the same situation, not even close, but close enough. Close enough that I'm standing in an alley 2 nights ago, looking down at someone, heels, and the first thought that shoots through my head is, Luca would have handled this. And in that moment, I knew I'd had that thought 1,000 times in the last 5 years, and I never let myself hear it. So I washed my hands, heels. When she asks about the alley, the story is not one of violence, but of its deliberate absence. Roman confesses to an act of mercy, a complete betrayal of Luca's brutal logic. This act of grace, however, seems to have caused an existential fracture, heels. I'm trying to figure out who the hell I am, he says, the confession of a man whose very identity was so woven into another's capacity for cruelty that to remove it is to leave him utterly vacant. Vivian's answer is a heavy, deep silence, heels. Her movements are ritual. She reaches out, turns off a flame beneath a pot that holds nothing but heated air, a perfect symbol for their long simmering lie. She moves the pot to a cold burner, a physical act of setting a dead thing aside, heels, before she finally turns to face him. In the quiet, she hears the familiar cadence of her own heart, a rhythm she knows too well, heels. It is the exact rhythm of an old wound, the same one that beat in a hallway at the Briarcliff mansion 4.5 years ago. The moment she overheard the whisper of a man she loved, meant for someone else. A different betrayal, but the same broken heart, heels. Roman, she begins, her voice like a surgeon's blade. I have to ask you one thing, and I need the absolute truth. The terms are set in stone. A lie now on this one point would be a wound from which they would never heal. His response is a single, heels, surrendered word, ask. In our 3 years, has there been another, Elena? His eyes flutter closed, a brief shield against the light. No, he swears, insisting he has maintained a careful, heels, almost fanatical caution, a level of vigilance that multiplied by 10 the second they were married. Heals. With that, the dam of Roman's guarded silence finally collapses. He frames his confession as the one conversation he had prayed he would never have to initiate. He says he knew from their first day just how strong she was, but this truth, Heals, this specific kind of darkness, was a cross he decided she should not have to bear. The man in the alley was not another Elena, that their new terrible code for a life taken, but some small-time fool given exile instead of a grave. Heals. He then lays out the stark measure of his supposed change. 5 years ago, he'd be fish food. But Viv, taking in this story of his evolution, slices through the noise to get to the heart of it with one soul-shaking question. Why now? Heals. His confusion is a visible thing. She clarifies. You could have told me this at any time. You didn't. So why are you telling me all of it right now? Heals. Her question hangs between them, answered only by a gaze so long it feels like he's looking for an escape. But his answer, when it finally arrives, shifts the entire axis of the story away from his guilt and onto her. Heals. Because of what you did in that ballroom. He speaks of watching her confront her enemy, not with rage, but with a terrifying stillness. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't make threats. She performed a clinical verbal autopsy, Heals, laying out the facts of the man's ruin with cold precision before simply allowing him to walk away, utterly destroyed by the weight of his own actions. Roman saw her afterward in the car on the way home. How light she seemed, Heals. He watched her set down her own burden, and in doing so, he was struck by a devastating revelation. I've been carrying something, Viv, he confesses, for years, something absolutely massive. Heals. That weight was the cornerstone of his world. The load he believed was the very source of his power. But to see her shed 4 years of bitterness in just 90 seconds, without a trace of fire, shattered his understanding. Heals. He had always measured strength by what a man could carry. She had just revealed that real power lies in knowing what must be set down. I'm nearly finished, she says, leaving a silence for him to fill, and he offers the last broken truth. Heals. He kept Elena a secret not from a doubt of her strength, but from the terror of her absence. I'm telling you now so you know precisely the man you married, he finishes, giving her the knife to cut the cord, based on the whole, ugly truth. Heals. The very least he could do. Heals. It is the absolute least you are owed, he confesses, the words acknowledging a deficit of honesty 3 years deep. I am sorry, Viv. His hands rest flat on the table, an act of capitulation, not a plea. He doesn't ask for forgiveness. Heals. He doesn't even ask her to stay. In answer, she stands. She crosses the kitchen, climbs the staircase to their bedroom, and pulls the door shut. But she does not turn the lock. She sits on the edge of the bed, face in her hands, but the tears refuse to fall. Heals. Crying was a language she no longer spoke. What she had to do now was infinitely harder. Heals. There in the stillness of the room, she gives herself over to a moment of pure, clean fury, a white-hot burn. She is luminous with rage at him for the deception, for letting her walk into their marriage blind. Heals. She seethes that he allowed her to see him as the one good man in their brutal world, when he was just better at hiding the blood on his hands. For a searing second, her anger even reaches the porch he destroyed. The ground where she had chosen him. Heals, now poisoned forever. Elena is on that porch now. Elena is at their kitchen table. Elena is a ghost that haunts the memory of his hand closing over hers. Heals. The rage, having burned everything outside, finally turns on her, the cruelest part of the process. She makes herself face the one truth she had buried, because somewhere, in a place without words, she knew. Not the details, not the name Elena, Heals, or the ghost of Luca, or the image of a blood-soaked shirt. But she knew the shape of the thing. A man like Roman Vercetti doesn't just happen. His power is built on the pain of others. By choosing his world, she had signed her name to the ledger. Heals. Sophia told her. Abrielle told her. Roman, in his own dark way, had told her exactly what he was. Heals. And she chose him. She saw a predator and called it solid ground while she was drowning. But her own complicity doesn't erase his crime. Sitting there, on the edge of their bed, she knows she owes him nothing. Certainly not the kindness of pretending it does. Heals. 2 hours pass before she comes back down. He is a statue exactly where she left him. The very air in the room has shifted, Roman. Yes, I'm not leaving you. She watches the tension bleed from his shoulders. Heals, though his expression remains carved from stone. But don't think for a second this is okay. He wouldn't. Then she dictates the new laws. I have things to say. You will listen. And if you dare interrupt me, Heals, I'm going back upstairs and you will not see me again until morning. Heals. He is already sitting, Yet he settles himself as bracing for a physical impact. She stays standing, an unmoving point in the devastation of their lives. She begins the autopsy. 1. You are wrong about why you hid this from me, Eels. She cuts through his fear of her leaving, calling it a partial truth. The real reason, the one he couldn't speak, was that he couldn't stand to see himself through her eyes. You wanted me to look at you, Roman, but only the version you approved of, Eels. That is vanity. The word hangs between them, heavier than the lie itself. The lie was born of fear, the vanity was born of pride. He says nothing as she goes on. 2. Eels. We will never have this conversation again. She makes it clear this isn't a request for him declaration. If another secret, another ghost, crawls out of the past years from now, they are finished. This is the only get-out-of-jail-free card I have in me. The next time is the end for us. Do you understand? He understands. 3. Luca. She goes through the facts. Luca is gone, his wife with him, his life intact. The message was received. Eels. He got more mercy than he deserved, she says, a quiet admission of the grim mathematics she herself had performed. You will not tell me where he is. He nods his consent. Then she demands a new, unbreakable vow. Eels. She insists that if any future darkness requires her knowledge, another danger, another Elena, anything at all from his world, he is to bring it to her, immediately. Without me having to tear it from your throat, she says, Eels. Without you hiding for 2 weeks trying to find the courage. Promise me. He does, but she makes him say the words. He swears he will tell her, within a week, right there in that kitchen. Eels. You have my word, he promises. 4. And for the first time, her voice splinters, a crack in the armor she lets him see as part of his sentence. That thing you said, about how I look at you like a man. She isolates this as the very heart of her rage. Eels. A poison that had to be drawn now, or it would kill them both. You don't get to use my perception of you as a shield to hide behind. She takes back her own gaze, refusing the role of the fool in his tragedy. Eels. I looked at you like a man because you were a man standing in front of me, not because I was some naive girl who couldn't see the world for what it was. I was not blind. Eels. Vivian's case against him isn't built on ignorance, but on a terrifyingly deep understanding of the life she chose. The name Elena, the brutal detail of the shirt, those were just scenery. The real failure, she tells him, was his. Eels. She knew the violent country she was walking into, Roman. She offers an alternate history. If he had told her the story of Elena back then, on the porch 3.5 years ago, confessed his part in it. Vivian, Eels. A woman named Elena was killed by one of my men. I didn't give the order, but the machine I built made it happen. She asks him if he can imagine what she would have done. No. And she delivers the killing blow. I would have married you anyway, Eels. She would have married him faster, she says, having seen he was a man strong enough to carry such a truth openly. Instead, she married a man who could carry the weight, but chose to hide it for years. And those are two very different men, Eels, the one she thought she chose and the one she got, Eels. My anger, she says, the words precise as a surgeon's blade, is not that you have an Elena in your past. My anger is that you let me marry a different husband than the one I would have chosen for myself. He draws a breath, a long, quiet sound of defeat. Eels. I understand, he admits. Then so low she can barely hear, you are right. I know I'm right. You are right, he says again. And I don't know how to undo 3 years of it. You don't, she replies. They can't be undone. They happened. They are scars. Eels. What you do now, starting this second, is you stop acting like the man I thought you were, and you start being the man I would have actually chosen. It's not one act of repair, but a long, silent atonement. You will do it in 1,000 quiet ways, every day, Eels, for a very long time, and you will never ask for credit. And then one day, years from now, I will be the one to see it, and I will be the one to tell you, Eels. But she warns him, do not dare ask when. He doesn't get to watch her heal like it's a project on a timeline. This wound isn't some simple cut you can fix with apologies and flowers. He will do the work, in silence, Eels, with the same brutal focus he gives anything he considers important. Do you understand? Say it. I will do the work in silence. I won't ask. I will not check in. I won't hope for anything. I will do it because this is how I should be your husband, Eels. Not for some prize waiting at the end. Yes, yes. Her body finally gives way, her frame sinking onto the stool opposite him, a fine tremble in her legs. Not a single tear fell. Her voice never broke. It was just the body, Eels, finally feeling the shock of a war she hadn't even officially fought, Eels. He's laid his hand on the island between them, palm up, a clear, silent signal of truce. A peace offering she could not yet take. One more thing, she says. Yes, Alina's family. What about them? He asks. Heals. Do they know anything about what really happened? Is there a body? Anything at all? Roman's silence is a heavy, solid thing in the room. They have a body, he says finally. The story was a car crash on a bad stretch of road. It was believable. Heals. They have a grave. He explains he managed it all through channels that lead nowhere. And every year, on her birthday, money finds its way into her mother's account. The mother thinks it's a benefit from Elena's old job, a legitimate company he owns, Heals, where the paperwork would technically make the payments legal anyway, Heals. Elena's mother doesn't even know his name. The fact that he is the origin of her pain is a truth she will never hold. Then why the payments? I was the one who built the room, Vivian's words cut through the air. That is not a good enough reason, Roman, Heals. I know. No, you don't. What you did is a kindness. It's an act, but it is so far from being enough. She gives voice to the true horror of it. A mother, somewhere, thinking her daughter's death was a tragic mistake, utterly blind to the fact she was murdered, Heals. A truth in its own way, a billion times more savage than reality. She has mourned a lie for 5 years. She was denied the purity of her own rage. You gave her the wrong grief. Vivian is quick to clarify she isn't suggesting he confess. Heals. She has no idea if that's the right choice, if it would bring peace or just shatter the woman's world a second time. I don't have that answer, Roman, and I won't pick the easy one for us. Heals. But I am telling you that at some point, in this life you say you want with me, you will have to face that. Not the headstone you bought, not the checks you write. The mother. That is the real penance. Heals. You will have to carry her mother in your head for the rest of your life. And now that you've told me, so will I. This, she shows him, is the reality of his confession. This is the gift he has given her. By telling me, you didn't unburden yourself. Heals. You just split the weight in two. For people like them, who exist outside of confessionals and courts, this is all it can ever be, a simple act of division. And I'm saying yes, I am agreeing to carry my half of that broken number because I love you, Heals. But you need to know exactly what I am saying yes to. He could only look at her, Heals. A sheen formed in his eyes. This wasn't a performance, nothing like the cheap theatrics of Adrian's tears in the ballroom. This was a silent, private thing. This was how a man really cries, alone in his own kitchen on a Saturday afternoon. Heals. I know what you're saying yes to, he finally said, his voice raw. I know you know. I love you. I know. I really thought I was going to lose you tonight. No, you weren't. It felt like I was. You were never going to lose me tonight. Heals. She corrects him, her voice level. You were going to lose me on the first Saturday afternoon of the rest of our lives. The very next time you tried to pull something like this. His confession, she lays bare, was an act of survival. Heals. This is what I have been trying to get you to see. I'm not afraid of the Elena in your past. I am terrified of the man who couldn't tell me she existed. Heals. That man, she tells him, is the one he has to kill. Not for her. For him. He reached, didn't try to take her hand. He just lowered his head, resting his forehead against the back of her hand on the cool wood, and stayed there. A long, Heals, silent moment passed, and she let him. After a beat, she brought her other hand up, placing it on the back of his head, gently holding him in place. Her palm felt the light spray of gray at his temples. Okay, she whispered. Okay. Outside. Heals, the light across the water had deepened into a bruised, violent purple. The unlit kitchen was slowly being swallowed by shadow. He finally lifted his head. Viv, yes, I need to ask you something. Yes, but not now. Not tonight. Heals. In a few days, he goes on. I need to ask you how we do the work from now on. What I have to do that's different. About all of it. He tells her this has been eating at him for months, long before the ballroom. I don't want to ask you tonight, Heals. You deserve one night where you aren't fixing up my messes. But in a few days, I want to sit down, and I have to make decisions, and I need you to help me. Will you do that for me? Yes. Okay. Yes. What kind of decisions are we talking about? Heals. Big ones. Structural. The kind of decisions, he says, that he should have brought her into a long, long time ago. I want to cut things out of the business. I want to close some rooms for good. Heals. Is that even something you can do? I don't know. Maybe. I've been working through the mechanics. He admits that parts of it will get ugly fast. There are men with a lot of money tied up in those rooms. But some of it, I think I can do it. Okay. Heals. She met his stare. Roman, yes, we'll talk in a few days, but you need to understand something first. I didn't marry you to change you. I need that idea to be perfectly clear in your head. This is not an ultimatum. Heals. I'm not sitting here saying that if you want to keep me, you have to close those rooms. That's not what this is. I never once asked you to shut anything down when you asked me to marry you. Feels. When we got married, she says, I never said a word about shutting down rooms. I'm not saying it now. If you do this, it's because you want to, not for me. Do you understand? I understand. I am deadly serious, Roman. The difference is everything. Feels. If you close those rooms for me, you will one day hate me for it. I've already had one husband resent me for things I never asked for. I will not do that again. I understand. Viv, yes. I'm not doing it for you, he says. Feels. I've been thinking about this for months. I didn't have the courage. Yes. Well, she answered, her voice softening. You have it now. I have it now. Good. And they sat there opposite each other, Feels, as the last of the light bled from the kitchen. Feels. Out past the porch, the ocean kept its same steady beat, the one it had long before they were born. After a while, she reached across the island and her hand found his. He took it. This wasn't the end of the fight. It was just the start of a different one. Feels. They would go to war again. Once, that same week, over something stupid and small that had nothing to do with this. And again, 2 months later, over something enormous that had everything to do with it. A year from now, Feels. They would have a terrible fight about whether the man who walked into a certain room would be the same one who came home, and if she could live with that. They were about to learn, the hard way, how to be married as themselves, Feels, not the people they pretended to be, Feels. But that Saturday, in the failing light of the kitchen, as the bay turned from blood red to black, Vivian Versetti held her husband's hand, and she knew. The monster she went back to the ballroom to kill was not the biggest one she would ever have to face, Feels. Not even close. The hardest thing was sitting right in front of her, and as it turned out, she wasn't scared of him at all. The talk they had a few days later didn't happen in the kitchen. Roman took her out on the water. They didn't speak for the first hour, Feels. It was a small boat. Roman always said big boats were for fools. Feels. He had no time for the massive yachts that men used to broadcast their worth to the world. Theirs was a working boat, slicing through water that was like polished glass in the late October air. A color somewhere between gunmetal and sea green, Feels. He steered them out. She watched from the back, a thermos of coffee in her hands, as the cliffs she knew so well became a memory. And then quiet. He cut the engine, and they were adrift in a world made only of them. She understood then, Feels, why they had to be so alone for this. I wrote some of it down, he said. You wrote it down? I'm the one who doesn't write things down. You know that. I know, but I wrote it because I didn't trust my own voice. I was afraid I would talk myself out of it, Feels, into something smaller. He offered her 3 torn pages from a legal pad in his office. Feels. His handwriting was exactly what she would have pictured, tight, restrained, all block letters. She took the pages, her stillness a counterpoint to the boat's gentle sway. A single gull dove toward the rail before peeling off into the gray air. Feels. She read all 3 pages through once, then a second time before her gaze finally came up to meet his. Roman? Yes.
This is seismic.
I know. This isn't just closing a few rooms. This is taking a sledgehammer to the foundations. Not all of them, Feels. The 4 main pillars stay. Shipping keeps going, for now. Real estate, the restaurants, security, all of it stays. But the gray areas, the predatory lending, Feels, the backroom deals, and those 3 southern outfits I've lied to myself about for 5 years, Feels. I'm tearing them down, not all at once. 6 months. 18 for one. It starts this week. Roman, do you have any idea what will happen if you move this fast? I know exactly what will happen. That's why it's on paper. I need you to look at it, Feels. And then I need you to tell me where I'm a complete fool. Her eyes moved over the pages a 3rd time. The woman she used to be, the girl who could find a tiny error in wool invoices over a hat shop, was gone. 4 years had made her into something else entirely, Feels. A woman who could take apart an operational plan like a novel, who could find every easy lie a man writes for himself in a 3-page confession, Feels. She saw it twice on the 2nd page. Roman's view of how a crew would react to being cast off was an exercise in dangerous fantasy. The 3rd crack appeared on page 3, Feels. A glaring miscalculation of a financial exposure she had personally red-flagged in Sophia's ledgers 11 months before. She laid out her case. He, to his credit, actually listened. All right, he finally breathed, the sound heavy in the space between them. Feels. 2 of those points I grant you, but the 3rd, on that I have to object. You're moving with caution. I need a killer. Fine, then object. And he did. But For 20 minutes, a lifetime on that boat, they tore the problem apart, feels a detail that now means less than nothing. She won twice. He won once. In the end, she folded the sheets of paper, a silent truce, and slid them back inside his jacket. Feels. All right, she said, her voice a low anchor. All right? Yes, Roman. All right, you do this. I'll keep the books. I will stand there when you break it to Sophia. I will be in the chair next to you when you look the other three men in the eye, Feels, the ones who have to hear it from your mouth. But I am saying this once, just as I said it in the kitchen. If this is in any way an attempt to buy something from me, you and I will have a problem we cannot solve. It purchases nothing. I am already here, Feels. I was here before this plan ever drew breath, and I will be here if you burn these pages tonight. Do you understand? We're clear. Say the words. This buys me nothing, he recited, his voice flat. You are already here. Good. He gave one sharp, final nod. Feels. His eyes were lost somewhere on the line where the water met the sky. Viv, yes. I can't stop thinking about Elena's mother. I know. I have no earthly idea what I owe her. Neither do I. I just assumed you'd have the answer. Roman, Feels. I lie next to you every night. There is no secret truth I hold that you don't. I have the exact same facts you do. And yes, she lives in my head every day. But this is where I always land. For 5 years, her grief has been built on a lie. That is a fact, Feels. And the real grief, the true one she is owed, it has a physical address. You are that address. If she is to know the truth, the face she looks at must be yours. Not some lawyer, not a letter, not a ghost in a bank account. Feels. You don't get to buy a clean conscience by proxy. If you do this, it is your face she will see. She'll hate me. Yes. She will. She might call the police. She might. She could try to shoot me. That is also a possibility. What do I do then? Feels. You don't fight back. You don't run. You don't call your men to be a wall between you and her fury. You will just sit there. You will let her do whatever she needs to do. That is the only way, Roman. It is the only way that is fair. And if you can't face that, Feels, if you can't sit in her kitchen and take her screams or the cops or the sting of her hand, then you never tell her. And you take the lie with you to the grave, Feels. And you will never ever fool yourself, like all the other men you know, that carrying that weight is some kind of noble act. It's just a lie you chose to keep. Those are your only two roads, and I am not choosing for you. A long, deep silence fell, Feels, the air thick with the unsaid. I'm going to tell her, he finally said. Okay, but not this month. The shutdowns have to be underway first, the others. They can't see me go to her until it's done. It would look like weakness, a whole other kind of weakness, Feels. It would put other people at risk, I understand. But within the year, I'll do it within the year, alone. Alone? Alone, Roman? Viv. I will not ask my wife to watch another woman learn that I am the reason her daughter is dead. Feels. That is the barest minimum of human decency. Feels. You gave me the same courtesy. In the kitchen the night I told you about the ballroom. You gave me the room, just me. I'm giving her the same. She didn't argue. That, she would learn, was part of being his wife. Feels. There were moments to fight because she was right, and there were moments to be silent because he was. The dismantling of Roman's world took 14 months. It was a bloodletting. One particularly savage week in February, Feels. An old world figure from another city, a name from the first page of the file he'd given Abriel, a name Viv had mentally marked as the friend, decided Roman was making a fatal mistake. A mistake that made him unpredictable. Feels, and unpredictability is poison to everyone's bottom line. Feels. The friend reached out. He made 2 calls to men on Roman's payroll. Both men walked straight to Roman, a detail Sophia would later point to as absolute proof of the tectonic shift in Roman's world. 5 years ago, she'd mused, Feels. At least one of them would have sided with the friend. So Roman went to see the friend himself. Vivian stayed behind. For 3 days she waited at the Cliff House. Sleep was a foreign country. Sophia came and took the guest room. Feels. They just played cards on the kitchen counter until 2 in the morning each night, the slap of the cards the only sound, never speaking his name. Because what was there to say? Feels. He materialized on the 4th day. A fresh cut bisected his eyebrow, but the rest of him was there. The friend, he reported, had been persuaded at length to stand down. And during their talk, the friend had said some things, Feels. Things that hammered home for Roman exactly why he was burning it all down. What things? Vivian asked. He said I was going soft over a woman. Ah, and I told him I was going soft because I'd finally found a woman worth going soft for, Feels. And if that's what going soft means, then every man he ever respected was soft at some point. They were just smart enough not to say it to his face. Feels. And how did he take that? He told me I always had a reckless mouth. Then he poured me a drink, and he starts telling this story I've never heard about his first wife, the one who died back in '87. When he finished, he just looked at me and said I should come home to you. Said if he ever heard about me making one wrong step with the business I was keeping, he'd take it from me. So I told him I'd just have to earn it then. Every day. He just said, you better. And I left. Roman? Yes. Is he going to take them? No, he won't take them. The man is almost 80. He just needed to say the words out loud so he could finally be at peace. And she knew he was right. By then, she could read him. She could see the line between the things he said because they were true and the things he said because he desperately needed them to be. That was a truth. And then 6 months later, on a bitter Tuesday as the spring light began to die, Roman got in his car and drove alone for 600 miles north. He sat in a kitchen with a woman named Adriana Rosales, Elena's mother, and he told her exactly what happened to her daughter. He was in that house for almost 3 hours. When he finally called Vivian, it was from the parking lot of some decaying motel. His voice was shattered, scraped raw. He wasn't crying, but you could hear the empty space where the tears had been, the hollowed-out silence after the storm. She didn't call the police, Vivian asked. She didn't shoot me, he answered. She hit me. Twice. A hard, open-handed slap. And then she just folded into a chair. And she cried for what felt like forever. And I just sat there, across from her, and I didn't move. And when the story was out, the questions began. For 2 solid hours, she cross-examined the past, and he answered every single one. No softened edges, no gentle lies. He gave her every piece of what he knew and admitted to all he didn't. He confessed what he'd done to the man who was truly to blame. He explained the money. But there was no pardon. Vivian, she never gave him that. It's important to know this. The words, I forgive you, never once crossed her lips. Instead, Adriana delivered a sentence. She was never to see his face again. All lines of communication cut. And the money, it was to be rerouted, transformed into a scholarship in Elena's name at the community college she'd attended for 1 semester, before her world ended. And she demanded a yearly report from a law firm, a neutral party, proving where every last cent went. And then, he said, his voice a ghost on the line, as I was walking out, she said something. Thank you for coming. Thank you for making me real. I didn't know what she meant, and it wasn't my place to ask. I just got in the car and drove, and now I'm here, talking to you. Vivian let the weight of it settle. Come home, was all she said. Okay, Roman, yes, you did the right thing. I'm telling you this once. I will never say it again, because I will not let you be a man who needs to be told he did the right thing. But I'm saying it now this one time, because tonight you need to hear it. Understand? Come home. And he did, but their story was never meant for a happy ending. Those are for other people. In truth, the year that followed was the year that Vivian simply and quietly came apart. She lacked the language for it then, but the post-mortem was brutally clear. It was the blast radius of a grief that had been meticulously packed over 11 years, the collateral from a life immolated in her marriage to Adrian Cole. She had, in truth, smothered a decade of quiet desperation, and her own mind, without permission, finally came to collect. The fallout was tidal. Some days she was a sculpture on the porch, captured in place by a force no one else could see. On others, a venomous, inexplicable rage would boil to the surface, a fury she aimed at Roman for sins he never imagined. All because he was the husband in the room, while the ghost who'd earned her wrath was long gone. Sued into some sun-bleached condo and wiped from the map of her world. And Roman, here was the heart of it, he never let the blows land. That was the singular act of grace for which she would be forever indebted. While she failed spectacularly at being his wife, he never once demanded penance. Not a word. He would just make her coffee. Take up a silent vigil at the far end of the porch. Go for a long walk. He built a perimeter around her. A safe place for her to wrestle her own ghosts and find the long road back to herself. And when she finally did, he never asked where she had been. Then one morning, 8 months into this limbo, she woke up and the anger was simply gone. She lay still, testing the silence inside her the way one prods a tooth that has finally stopped its throbbing. She thought of Adrian, of a ballroom, of a champagne dress she'd left for dead in an airport trash can. Nothing, just the phantom limb of an old pain, the kind of ache from a healed fruit that whispers when it rains, but the fire itself had drowned. So she got up, went downstairs. Roman was at the kitchen island, lost in the morning paper. Hi, she offered. Heels. He looked over the pages. Hi, I think I'm done. He didn't have to ask what with. He knew. He just knew. Okay, he said. It might not be forever. It might come back. But for right now, I'm done. Okay. Would you stop saying okay? Heels. What do you want me to say? I don't know. Something. He folded the paper, the crisp sound filling the silence, and came around the island. He held her face between his palms, that impossibly gentle way he had, and just studied her for a beat. Heels. I like you better than anybody, he said. And with that, she broke apart and laughed. Heels. The sound that came out of her was fractured and loud and real. That's your something? It's what I've got, Viv. I'm not a man for big speeches. I know you're not. It's the truth, though. I know. She pressed her forehead to the fabric of his shirt, heels, and his arms wrapped around her. They stood like that in the quiet kitchen for a long time. Then she pulled away to make coffee and he went back to his paper. And that was it, the grand finale. No orchestra swelled, no fireworks, just a Thursday. Heels. Jump cut 2 years after the fundraiser, and Vivian was finally on a plane to see her mother. For 18 months, they had carefully circled one another. The first attempt had been a phone call, 4 minutes. Her mother cried, called her a monster. Heels said she loved her and hung up. Heels. The second call lasted an hour. The third, 3. By the time Vivian flew to Fort Lauderdale, their Sunday conversations had become a year-long ritual, her mother slowly mapping the geography of this new version of her daughter, Heels. Her mother opened the door to the condo, gave her a long clinical inspection, and announced, "You're skinny. Mom, you are. Too skinny. Come in. I made too much food. I knew I was doing it, and I did it anyway." Roman was hovering on the walkway, Heels. He hadn't wanted to crowd the reunion, even offered to wait in the car, but Vivian had said no. Her mother's eyes finally landed on him, Heels. In more than a year of phone calls, her mother had assembled a detailed composite of Roman in her head, a verdict she had mostly kept to herself. "You," her mother said, pointing a finger. "Me," Roman confirmed. "You sound younger on the phone." Heels. "I apologize for that. Don't. It's not a crime. Get in here. Shoes off. I've got slippers." He took off his shoes. He put on the slippers. They were painfully, comically small. He wore them without a word of protest for the next 4 hours. Heels. And you can be damn sure her mother noticed. Later, huddled in the kitchen, her mom whispered, "All right, he's a good one. Don't you dare tell him I said so." "I won't. I had a whole speech ready." "I know you did." "Well, it's canceled. For today." Heels. Okay, they were there for 4 days. On the last night, her mom and Roman were on the lanai with coffee, deep in some story Vivian couldn't quite hear. When Vivian approached, her mother waved a hand. "Stop lurking, Vivian. We're fine." And Roman, Heels, not even looking up, added, "Your mother is telling me about a man in 1978 who sold her a stolen car. I'd like to hear how it ends. You can wait." So Vivian waited. Her mother improbably lived another 11 years. Heels. She came to visit twice a year for the rest of her life. She and Roman built a strange and private friendship that Vivian never understood and never tried to. A bond built on gin rummy and a shared hatred for the same cable news hosts. Heels. When her mother died, it was quiet in her sleep after a good day, and it was Roman who flew down first because Vivian was trapped in a meeting she couldn't break. He handled it all. The papers, the priest, the endless awful phone calls. Heels. When Vivian finally walked in at 2 in the morning, the apartment was spotless. There was food on the counter. Her mom's favorite picture was on the nightstand, angled toward the bed, just how she kept it, Heels. And Roman was just sitting in the armchair by the window. He stood the second he saw her and said nothing. He just held her, for a very long, very quiet time. That was still years away, Heels. The world Roman had built would morph over the next decade into something that he, Vivian, and Sophia couldn't distill into a single phrase anymore, Heels. A large piece of it was, by any reasonable definition, completely legitimate. Another piece existed in a perpetual twilight between law and morality, and a smaller, harder piece of it shrank a little more with every turn of the calendar, Heels. Roman never declared he was going clean. He didn't write a book. He made no speeches. He never paraded his reformation because he wasn't reformed, not in the way people who like neat endings use the word. At 30, he was a man who lived by a code, Heels. At 45, he began to suspect that code had cracks in its foundation. At 50, he started the slow, patient work of shoring it up. And by 60, Heels, he had built a life his 18-year-old self would not have recognized and would have probably called weak. He didn't care. Heels. He told Vivian once that his 18-year-old self was just a boy, and a man should never let a boy's judgment run his life. In the 6th year, he went away by himself to a grave in a town whose name he never spoke. When he came back, all he said was that he'd been, and she knew not to ask what was said there. She had learned by then that their marriage was a house with many rooms. She held the keys to most, but some doors were locked, and their love was built on the silent promise to never rattle the knobs of doors she wasn't meant to pass through. For her part, Vivian began to construct. For years, she wanted nothing to do with a venture of her own. The scars from the Cole Hale years were so deep that for almost a decade, the idea of her name on a letterhead made her feel hollow. But then, in that 6th year after the ballroom, Sophia, nearing 70 and only grudgingly admitting she might slow down, though she would never say retire, looked at her and said, "Vivian, you're being wasted, doing what you do just for this family." "You need to have a thing of your own." "I don't want a company," Vivian shot back. "I didn't say a company. I said go make a thing. You have the money, you have the time, and you have a brain that will eat itself if you don't give it a ward a wage." So over the next 3 years, Vivian built a boutique consulting firm that specialized in, of all things, forensic accounting. It was the same microscopic work she'd been doing since the days of Rhoda's dental office, only now it was weaponized, honed to a razor's edge and institutionalized. She took the cases that made other firms tremble. She charged a king's ransom. She moved like a ghost. Her firm, named for the street Teresa, had once lived on. A secret homage nobody ever caught, and she never explained. Became, in 5 years, the first number you called when the one thing you wanted most was to keep your name out of the papers. Her empire was born from the raw potential of young women, and she paid them some sums that fractured the local economy. There was one rule, carved in stone. The day ended at 6 in the evening. Precisely. She was the sort of leader who demanded a brutal excellence only because she gave it back 100-fold. A woman who, if you earned her allegiance, would bend the laws of physics on your behalf. If you didn't, she would explain to you exactly why. One time, behind a closed door, and that conversation would never happen again. 11 years after the ballroom, a journalist found her for a feature profile. The pitch email called them the quiet architects of the unseen economy. Vivian's first instinct was a flat refusal. It was Roman who insisted. "You have spent," he said, the morning light cutting across the breakfast table, "far too much of your life mastering the art of being invisible." And so she agrees, the story is written. Was it a fatal mistake? No, it was a final masterful seizure of power. When it runs, the writer somehow captures her very soul. There is no mention of a past life. Vivian Hale was a name sealed in a tomb of legal iron. The piece, all 8,000 words of it, is a portrait of the fortress she had become instead. The photograph says it all. Vivian in her office, unadorned in a simple gray sweater, face bare of makeup, hair cut short, the same way she'd worn it since the day she burned her old life to the ground. She looks like a woman in her late 40s you do not, under any circumstances, cross. The article made its way to a few ghosts. One, a man named Adrian Cole, saw that picture, and some terrible light of recognition flickered deep within him. For weeks he reportedly clawed at his contacts, desperate for a link, before he suddenly went silent. The man, you see, was old. The world he once schemed to conquer had shriveled to a forgotten back alley. Vivian, for her part, had stopped looking his way. She hadn't even thought to ask about him in 8 years. The true victory arrived a year after the article, at some forgettable dinner party, when a woman she'd never met spoke his name, casually. A minor player in a dead industry, which he was. And it hit Vivian then, a wine glass cool in her hand. It had been nearly 3 years since his name had last formed even a shadow in her thoughts. It wasn't an act of will. Her mind was simply too occupied with the running of her world. That, she knew, was winning. This was never about forgiveness. Forgiveness is a negotiation with ghosts. This was about erasure. It was the stark, final clarity that this man, after all the years and all the life she built with her own 2 hands, was not some defining scar upon her soul. He was a crack in the pavement on a road she had walked so many times she no longer saw it. The years fell away. Vivian is on the porch of a house that clings to a cliff, coffee in hand, a book resting unread on her lap. Roman had died the year before. It was no grand tragedy, just a quiet dimming of a flame. He went to bed, woke feeling unwell, and was gone by the next night. The funeral was small. Only the ones who mattered. In the months that followed, the thing she felt most was the silence. The specific hollow quiet that settles when a great humming engine that has run in the next room for your entire life finally sputters and stills. She missed him, feels. The feeling was that simple. She missed the man. But she was not broken. She sat on the porch watching the sea perform its endless work, and a film began to play in her mind. Fleeing the Briarcliff mansion, one suitcase in her hand, feels. The sound of scissors in Teresa's kitchen, shearing away the woman she used to be, the dentist's chair, a brutal February night in Abrielle's study, a man's silhouette across a desk. She saw the ballroom, the crimson of the dress, feels, felt the pressure of Roman's hand on the small of her back, a silent, unbreakable vow, feels. She saw the Saturday he told her the truth about Elena, the way the light fell in their kitchen, the payphone call he made from a motel lot after his last confession to Adriana Rosales. Then she remembered the morning she woke up, walked downstairs, feels, and found that the rage was just gone. She was an old woman now, Teresa gone nearly as long. Abrielle somehow was still holding on, complaining from a sun-drenched retirement home. Sophia was gone, and Marisol. Marisol, feels, who packed that suitcase, who looked her in the eye and said with a terrifying certainty, "You are going to be so okay that one day he is going to wake up in a cold sweat because of how okay you are." Marisol lived to be 90, feels, dying in a bed Vivian bought for her with Vivian's hand in hers, feels. And that act, holding that hand, was one of the most powerful things Vivian had ever done. She sat there, the coffee cold, and wondered what she might say to those younger versions of herself, feels. What words do you give the 23-year-old girl who married a beautiful monster she never understood? To the 34-year-old queen in a champagne dress, balanced at the top of a staircase. To the ghost in Teresa's kitchen, holding the shears, feels. The question hung in the sea air, but if she had to distill it all down to one truth, it was this. The worst thing a person can do is not to throw you away, feels. The real poison is the ideology they drill into you first. The belief that you were born for no other purpose than to be discarded, feels. That is the war. It has nothing to do with the ballroom, or the last words, or the suitcase packed in haste. The real battle is with their voice inside your head, the one that whispers that you have reached the end of your value. The real work, feels, if you get the chance to do it, is to dig that voice out. Sometimes it starts on a plane crossing an ocean. Sometimes in a little kitchen above a laundromat, feels. Or maybe it's in a dusty office when someone who is neither a savior nor a villain just looks at you and says, "I don't care who you were. Tell me who you are." It takes years. It can take all of them. But you claw it out of you, piece by bloody piece, feels. By living, by building, by failing, and by choosing to love people who are brave enough to see you, feels. And then one day, with no ceremony at all, it's gone. The silence left in its wake is not emptiness. It is sovereignty. And the ones who cast you out, they become footnotes. Not because the pain wasn't real. It was shatteringly real, feels. And you never have to deny that. But they are no longer the main characters. You are. The suitcase is the story. The stranger's kitchen is the story. The scissors are the story. The office is the story. The complicated man who loved you anyway, feels. Who let you teach him how to be better? He is the story. Everything that came after, that is the story, feels. The mornings on this porch, the coffee, the unopened book, that is the story. You are the story. She drained the last of the cold coffee, setting the cup down with a soft click. The ocean wind moved through her hair, short and white now, feels. The way it had been short and dark a whole lifetime ago. From inside, a telephone began to ring, one of the young wolves from her firm, no doubt, with a problem that could have waited. But this one never waited, feels, which was exactly why Vivian was leaving her most of the company. She pushed herself up, a knee aching in protest, feels. She moved through the sliding door to answer. Behind her, the empty chair on the porch was drenched in sun. The sea went on with its work indifferent, as it had before she was born, and as it would after she was gone. Inside the house, a woman who once ran from a party in a champagne dress with a single suitcase, lifted a receiver in a home that was hers, and said, in a voice that was hers, "Hello, this is Vivian," and that was the end. The story was finished.